The hiss comes first, not from wind or fire, but from steam, sharp, restless, alive. It curls through the narrow streets of London, carrying the scent of burnt beans, ink, and coal. The city is waking again, eyes red, hands trembling, chasing another hour it cannot afford to lose. Somewhere in Soho, a writer dips his pen into black coffee. Somewhere in Whitechapel, a factory girl drinks tea so strong it tastes like iron. The sun has not yet risen, but caffeine already rules. It is the height of the Victorian age, an empire that never sleeps, powered by sleepless men. The same clerks who built fortunes on ledgers now count their lives in cups. The same poets who dreamed of beauty burn through the night on borrowed energy. Coffee houses hum like cathedrals, filled with smoke, ambition, and the faint tremor of too much wakefulness. Caffeine has become the city's bloodstream, invisible, relentless, divine. They said it sharpened the mind. They said it gave them strength. But brilliance fades, and the body remembers the debt. Every empire burns brightest before it breaks. So tonight, keep your cup close and listen to the hum beneath the city's breath. Because this is where it began, caffeine and the city, when London learned to stay awake and forgot how to rest. Subscribe and stay with me. There are more sleepless nights ahead, more stories stirring in the dark. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? The city never sleeps, it only waits for the next cup. The hiss comes before the light, a thin, steady breath rising from iron pipes, slipping between floorboards and window seams, whispering through the bones of the city. It is the sound of London waking, not with birdsong, but with steam. Somewhere in the depths of Whitechapel, a kettle trembles on a blackened stove, its lid rattling like a restless coin. In another part of the city, a cafe owner strikes a match beneath his copper pot, and the scent of roasted beans curls into the air, meeting the fog that presses against the windows. The two mingle smoke and morning until they are indistinguishable. The streets outside are not yet awake, but they are listening. Gas lamps hum faintly against the mist. A carriage wheel cuts through a puddle, echoing through the stillness like a heartbeat under blankets of soot. In a small garret room, a young clerk sits at his desk, fingers stiff, eyes red from another night, spent chasing numbers under weak candlelight. He pours the last inch of yesterday's tea into a cracked cup and drinks it cold. It is bitter, metallic, and perfect. The first warmth he's felt since midnight. Across the river, a print shop creaks to life. The foreman unlocks the door, his breath clouding before him as he moves toward the furnace. His apprentice, a boy no older than 15, feeds the fire with coal and yawns. By the time the first sheets roll from the press, they are both gulping coffee so dark it stains their tongues. The city's words will be born from caffeine today, as they are every day. Ink and stimulant, press and pulse, all working together to keep London's story alive one sleepless morning at a time. Inside the pastry shop next door, the baker's wife boils tea leaves that were used twice already. She doesn't mind. It still has strength enough to steady her hands. The first customers will come soon, carriage drivers with coin, chimney sweeps with ash on their faces, the laundress with her sleeves rolled high. All of them will reach for a cup before they speak, before they even look at one another. It is ritual now. The city cannot rise without it. Caffeine is London's new sun. It burns quietly inside every pot and every chest, turning fatigue into rhythm. No sermon, no law, no empire decree binds the people so thoroughly as this need to wake, to move, to keep from stopping. The factories demand it. The railways demand it. The world itself seems to hum to the same frequency, the hiss of something boiling just below calm. And when the first light finally crawls over the Thames, it touches not golden towers, but grey roofs dripping with condensation. Steam lifts from chimneys, from carts, from cups, from mouths. London exhales alive again, though not truly rested. The air tastes of metal and coffee and coal dust. In that mixture lies the heartbeat of an empire that refuses to sleep. The day begins, as it always does, with a hiss, a sip, and the quiet surrender to another waking dream. The ships come before sunrise, silent hulks easing into the Thames, their hulls dark with salt and years of travel. Dock workers wait along the quays, breath blooming in the cold, eyes fixed on the shadowed decks that carry the Empire's newest treasure sacks upon sacks of green coffee beans, rough to the touch, sour-smelling, still damp from the tropics. Each bag bears a stamp: Java, Ceylon, Brazil, words that sound almost mythical in the damp morning air of London, where nothing ever seems to dry. The dock hands unload in rhythm, boots thudding on planks slick with river mist. They do not think about the places these beans come from, the red earth, the plantations, the fields worked by hands they will never see. They only know the weight of each sack, the roughness of the hemp, the pay waiting in their pocket at day's end. Yet somewhere in the chain of labor that stretches across oceans, a woman in the highlands of Ceylon picks the cherries one by one, her fingers stained crimson, the same fruit that now lands here, beneath cranes and gulls and the grey breath of the Thames. London will roast them, grind them, drink them, until the flavour of empire becomes a daily necessity. The city's taste buds have changed from ale to caffeine, from indulgence to endurance. The coffee houses that once housed philosophers have turned into dens of commerce. Men in waistcoats speak not of poetry, but of trade routes, tariffs, and shipments. The bean, bitter and bold, has replaced the coin as the measure of progress. Inside a narrow warehouse near Billingsgate, the air is thick with dust and roasted oil. The first roasters of the morning arrive, rolling up their sleeves to stoke the iron drums. Fire flares orange in the gloom, licking the metal and searing the raw beans into something darker, stronger. The smell fills the room, part smoke, part sweetness, and seeps through the cracks of the door into the street beyond. Soon, the whole neighborhood smells awake. One of the roasters, an old man named Carrigan, leans close to the drum. He says he can tell the origin by scent alone. Ceylon for brightness, Brazil for weight. He smiles through soot-blackened teeth. The empire in a cup, he mutters, half to himself. And he isn't wrong. Each sack is a geography lesson written in aroma, a map of control, of oceans crossed, and labor spent. By noon, the carts are already on the move. Barrels of freshly roasted beans roll toward the cafes and counting houses. At every corner, the air seems warmer, humming with that particular energy that comes not from wind or fire but from the promise of wakefulness. In a city where exhaustion is constant, the bean is worshipped like medicine. At dusk, as the ships empty and the warehouses fill, London drinks for the first time the day's new roast. It tastes sharp, the taste of distance, of work, of a world grown smaller and faster. No one calls it a drug. They call it modernity. They call it morning. And far across the sea, as night falls on the plantations, the pickers sleep their labor carried in every sip that keeps the empire awake. The sound of boiling water is different when it's for tea. Softer, almost reverent, as if the kettle itself knows this is not mere thirst but ceremony. In kitchens from Kensington to Limehouse, London wakes again to the rustle of leaves that never grew here. Tiny, twisted, fragrant things that once caught the morning fog of Ceylon, Assam, and China, now steeped in the fog of the Thames. The leaf arrived quietly, but it conquered loudly. First, it was novelty, a luxury for the drawing rooms of Mayfair, poured from silver teapots into porcelain cups so thin they trembled in the hand. But soon it spread, like everything the empire touched. From the hands of duchesses to those of factory girls, tea became the heartbeat of the British day. The hours began to bend around it. Breakfast tea for courage, afternoon tea for civility, evening tea for calm. The empire was building railways and colonies abroad, but here in London, it was building rituals. In a small flat above a tailor's shop, a widow named Mrs. Kersey waits for her kettle to sing. She pours 1 spoon of the precious leaves into her chipped pot, lets them unfurl in the boiling water, and watches the color bloom gold, deepening to amber, amber to rust. It is her only luxury, this daily alchemy of leaf and steam. Outside, the streetcar clatters past, men shout, a baby cries. She sits still, both hands on her cup, feeling the heat seep into her bones. The world is large, but for 5 minutes, it is small enough to hold. Across town, in a club perfumed with cigar smoke and politics, gentlemen perform the same ritual, though they call it refinement, not survival. A servant in livery pours with precision, the stream unbroken, the conversation as measured as the pour. They speak of trade, of India, of balance sheets, never of the hands that plucked the leaves or the hunger that drives them. Tea, to them, is not a harvest. It is an inheritance. Down in the East End, the penny tea shops are opening. Steam fogs the windows, mixing with coal dust and chatter. Labourers crowd inside, cupping their mugs for warmth before work. The tea is weak, stretched from yesterday's leaves, but it carries something stronger than flavour. It carries endurance. It replaces gin, dulls hunger, softens misery. For a penny, one can be civilized for a few minutes, share in the empire's illusion of grace. By afternoon, the city hums with caffeine disguised as calm. Streets glisten, kettles hiss, and from every corner, 1,000 small acts of ritual unfold, spoons against porcelain, sugar dissolving, steam breathing out like sighs. The leaf has done what no ruler could, united every class under one addiction. And when the day closes, and the factory's quiet, the final cups are poured beneath gaslight. The tea is tepid now, the taste faint, but London drinks still. Because in a city that feeds the world, it is the world that feeds the city back, one trembling leaf at a time. There is a sweetness in the air tonight, and it doesn't belong to nature. It drifts from the narrow lanes of Bishopsgate and Clerkenwell, a scent of roasted cocoa beans, of sugar melting slow, of something almost divine hiding beneath the soot. London, for a moment, smells like comfort, but comfort, here, is never simple. Before the century began to rush, before the empire learned to live without sleep, there was chocolate, the gentle cousin of coffee and tea, dark as sin yet sold as innocence. In the windows of fashionable streets, glass jars gleamed with cocoa powder, purified and improved for digestion, the signs said. The drink was thick, sweet, and quiet, a luxury that even moralists approved. Unlike spirits, it did not loosen tongues or blacken eyes. Unlike gin, it lifted without destroying. But still, it changed people. A little warmth, a little strength, a soft, humming focus that promised virtue while whispering temptation. Inside a small chocolate house off Fleet Street, the air is golden with gaslight and smoke. Gentlemen read newspapers through monocles smudged with steam. Women, rare in such places once, now sit beside them, their gloved fingers wrapped around porcelain cups. A pianist in the corner plays something tender, a melody that dissolves into the sound of spoons and murmurs. Conversations blend with the aroma, half business, half confession. Ideas ferment here as quickly as sugar melts in the pot. At the counter, a boy in an apron stirs a copper cauldron of cocoa over the flame. The surface shimmers, thick as velvet, sending up slow breaths of sweetness. He works carefully. The owner, a strict woman named Mrs. Vire, insists that chocolate must never boil. It bruises the flavor, she says. Her shop is her pride, her defiance against a world owned by men. She claims her cocoa heals the nerves, calms the heart, and sharpens the mind, a kind of medicine you can believe in. Customers call her the doctor in a bonnet. But beyond the glow of her shop, another story clings to every cup. Ships still arrive at the docks, heavy with beans from the West Indies and West Africa, the fruits of another people's labor. The empire tastes sweet because somewhere else it tastes bitter. The men who haul the sacks never drink what they carry. The children who stir the fermenting pods in faraway fields will never see the fog that curls around London's rooftops. Still, by midnight, the city is alive with warmth. Lovers stroll beneath flickering lamps, fingers sticky from chocolate and pastry. Poets in boarding houses sip their final cup and call it inspiration. The steam, the sugar, the dark, all of it conspires to keep the body soft and the mind alight. Tomorrow will bring the clamour of engines and the harsh bite of coffee again. But for now, cocoa hums through the bloodstream of London like a lullaby. It is the sweetest dream the empire ever sold, one that tastes of mercy and forgetfulness, and leaves a faint brown stain on the tongue of history. It begins with a whistle, not the soft sigh of a kettle, but the shriek of an engine, sharp enough to cut the morning fog. Iron wheels grind over the rails, steam erupts in white clouds, and London opens its eyes to a new century, loud, relentless, and wide awake. The rhythm of the city is no longer made by church bells or carriage hooves, but by pistons, clocks, and cups. Everything moves faster now, and caffeine is the only thing that can keep up. At Paddington Station, dawn belongs to the railway men. They move like ghosts through the mist, lanterns swinging in their hands, shouting to be heard over the roar of the trains. A buffet car glows in the half-light, its windows fogged by heat and sweat. Inside, tea brews by the gallon, cups clatter on saucers, spoons scrape sugar from glass jars, and the scent of milk and coal mixes into something uniquely modern, industrial comfort. Porters gulp from tin mugs before the next train arrives, their hands shaking slightly, their hearts already racing. The passengers, merchants, engineers, and clerks step aboard with coffee still hot in their throats. They speak in half sentences, unfinished by sleep. For them, caffeine is no longer luxury or leisure. It is necessity, fuel for an empire in motion. Every rail line laid, every factory started, every newspaper printed by dawn's first light owes something to that restless chemical hum. The city's heartbeat has quickened, and it will never slow again. Factories wake like living things. Boilers throb, chimneys roar, gears shriek. On the floor, women and men move in rhythm with the machines, a dance of repetition, precision, and exhaustion. At the corners of the floor, kettles hiss beside the looms. A few drops of tea or coffee, swallowed quickly, is all that keeps the body from breaking. The overseer drinks his too, though his comes with sugar and cream, a comfort the workers cannot afford. Yet for one brief moment, all are equal before the cup. The newspapers call this progress. They speak of speed, invention, productivity, the miracle of the industrial age. But beneath the words lies a quieter truth. Britain's empire runs not on gold or coal alone, but on caffeine. The same hands that stoke furnaces also pour tea. The same minds that design railways also tremble from sleepless nights. The stimulant keeps everyone sharp enough to build, and just tired enough not to stop. As night falls, the same trains thunder back through the city, carrying men home to the same dim rooms. Their collars are grey with soot, their pulses uneven, but still they brew one last pot before bed. Steam rises again, smaller this time, but no less holy. The whistle of the engine fades into the hiss of the kettle, the sound of a city that no longer dreams, only persists. London has entered its new age, an empire of iron and insomnia, and somewhere between the station and the teacup, the world forgets how to rest. Before the roar of engines and the rattle of factories, London's ideas were born in quieter rooms, coffee houses, the sanctuaries of steam and speech. They had nearly vanished by the dawn of Victoria's reign, relics of the 18th century's chatter and pamphlets. But in this new industrial age, the habit returned not as leisure, but as necessity. The city had grown too vast, too fast. Men needed a place to sit, to scheme, to stay awake. And so, the coffee houses came back to life, one steaming cup at a time. The first to open again was on Fleet Street, where words had always been coin. It was called the Exchange, though no one exchanged money there, only gossip and exhaustion. Its walls were yellowed with smoke, its tables worn smooth by elbows and ink. Every morning, before the presses rolled, journalists, printers, and clerks crowded inside to gulp their salvation. The coffee was strong enough to sting the tongue and scorch the stomach, but that was the point. Pain proved it worked. In one corner sat a young reporter named Wainwright, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, eyes rimmed red. He wrote about Parliament by day and revolutions by night, his pen trembling between cups. The first sip brought clarity, the second courage, the third a kind of trembling poetry. By the fourth, his heart hammered like machinery. He would leave at dawn with pages full of ideas that felt immortal, only to forget them by noon. The owner, a stout man named Harris, had been a bookseller once. Now he sold energy. He claimed to have a continental blend, though the beans were usually from whatever the docks offered cheapest that week. Still, he understood his customers. "You don't come for flavor," he would say, polishing a chipped mug. "You come to stay alive." And he was right. The coffee house was not about taste. It was about motion, the illusion that thought could keep pace with the century's speed. Beyond Fleet Street, coffee houses began to bloom again like iron flowers. Soho, Bloomsbury, the Strand, every neighborhood had its haunt. In one, clerks rehearsed politics they would never practice. In another, painters argued about light and form until dawn. A few women began to appear, scandalizing the regulars with laughter and ink-stained fingers. For the first time, caffeine became a shared intoxication, intellectual, industrial, social. By nightfall, the air in the exchange grew thick enough to chew. Tobacco, sweat, coffee, and ambition swirled together into a kind of stimulant fog. Lamps flickered low, chairs scraped, someone muttered about debt, someone else about God. Outside, the city was black as coal. Inside, it burned with minds that refused to dim. When the final cup was poured and the door latched for the night, the silence that followed felt unnatural, almost wrong, as though London itself had briefly stopped breathing, but only briefly, because by dawn the kettles would hiss again, the pens would scratch, and the same exhausted men would return, chasing wakefulness through the steam. The coffee house had been reborn not as a refuge from work, but as the engine of it. The candle burns low on the clerk's desk, its wax spilling across the ledger like melted bone. Outside, the city is silent, or nearly so. A distant train groans, a dog barks, a carriage wheel turns once, twice, then fades. London sleeps, but not here. Here, in a narrow room above a counting house near Cornhill, a single man keeps vigil over columns of numbers that never end. His name is Thomas. His world is 6 feet wide, lit by tallow, fueled by tea. He is not alone, though he thinks he is. All across the city, thousands of men like him sit bent over desks, their quills trembling between ink and exhaustion. They are the invisible veins of empire, carrying its commerce and credit. The merchants and bankers will never see their faces, only their figures precise, unwavering, obedient. What keeps them upright is not faith or ambition, but the pale strength of caffeine, poured into chipped mugs and swallowed like medicine. Thomas reaches for his cup now, the tea gone cold but still potent. It smells faintly of smoke and iron, brewed strong enough to stain his tongue. He sips, grimaces, and begins again. The candle flickers as if to protest, but the ledger must be balanced before dawn. Outside, fog presses against the window like breath from something enormous. He rubs his eyes, blinking spots of light. His pulse drums unevenly, but he does not stop. The city does not reward rest. When the clock strikes 3, he pauses to stretch, listening to the building itself creak and sigh. Somewhere below, a night porter coughs. In the distance, bells from Street Mary Woolnoth mark the hour with metallic sorrow. Thomas lights another candle, though he cannot afford it. Shadows leap across the walls, twisting around shelves of ledgers that smell of dust and sweat. Each book holds a life's worth of labor wages, debts, the small mathematics of survival. He wonders, briefly, who tallies his own. His hands tremble now. Too much tea, not enough air. He opens the window, and the city exhales cold fog into the room. It smells faintly of coal smoke and bread, the scent of thousands waking soon to do it all again. For a moment, he imagines the city as one vast organism. The docks, its lungs, the banks, its heart, and men like him, its blood cells carrying caffeine instead of oxygen. At dawn, Thomas will close his book, seal it with wax, and stumble into the street. He will pass others just like him, pale faces, hollow eyes, the faint tremor of sleeplessness disguised as duty. They will nod, wordless, sharing a secret, that the empire runs not on steel or strategy, but on these long, bitter nights. As he blows out the candle, the smoke curls into the air, forming shapes that dissolve before he can name them. He sits for a moment in the dark, heart still racing from tea and toil, and whispers a quiet prayer he does not believe in. Then he rises, stiff, and walks into the new day. Another ghost, in a city that never truly sleeps, only drinks and counts, until it forgets why. The whistle screams before the sun rises. It cuts through the fog and the slums, slicing across streets still slick from night rain. Inside a tenement room in Spitalfields, a girl named Clara stirs. She cannot afford an alarm clock, the factory does that for her. She dresses in the dark, hands numb, breath clouding before her face. Her dress smells faintly of machine oil and coal dust. On the table, a single tin kettle waits beside a cracked mug. She lights the stove with a splinter of wood and blows on the flame until it holds. The hiss comes slowly, softly, like the start of a song she already knows by heart. A spoonful of tea leaves, reused from yesterday, tumbles into the pot. She adds water, no sugar, and waits for the color to bloom. It darkens into something strong and bitter, a warmth that feels almost alive in this grey world. The tea scalds her lips, but she drinks anyway. It isn't pleasure, it's survival. The caffeine sharpens the edges of her exhaustion, keeps her hands steady when the looms begin to move. Her mother used to say, "Tea makes the body kind." Clara isn't sure that's true. She only knows it makes the hours shorter. Outside, the streets are already stirring. Boys push carts of coal. Women hurry with shawls wrapped tight against the chill. The factory looms ahead, a fortress of brick and smoke. The windows are fogged with steam, and behind them, the machines are already awake. She joins the line at the gate, 100 girls with the same pinched-look eyes, too old for their faces, fingers red from spinning. The foreman nods, checks the clock, and the gates close like a mouth. Inside, the air is thick, a mix of dust, oil, and breath. The sound is endless, the clatter of metal, the shriek of belts, the hum of gears. It fills the skull, the lungs, the heart. Between shifts, Clara and the others gather by a single rusted kettle near the wall. It wheezes and spits, but it is theirs. They pour the tea into dented mugs, share crusts of bread, and lean against the brick for warmth. For 5 minutes, they are not laborers, but girls again, laughing softly, cups pressed to their lips like secrets. The tea dulls hunger, quiets the ache in their backs. It gives them something to hold on to when the day stretches too long. "It's the only thing that listens," one girl says, swirling her cup. They laugh, though none of them truly smile. Then the whistle blows again, and they return to their stations. When night comes, Clara will walk home through the soot and fog, her ears still ringing. She will boil another pot from the same tired leaves, drink it alone in the silence of her room, and stare at the window until it fogs with her breath. Tomorrow will begin the same, a kettle, a whistle, and a cup of strength disguised as tea. In every factory across London, the same ritual unfolds. 1,000 kettles, 1,000 weary hands. Tea is the empire's quiet miracle, the poor man's fire, the working woman's prayer. And in its steam, the city breathes, trembles, and carries on. By midday, Fleet Street hums like a living nerve. The presses thunder below the pavement. shaking ink and sweat through the floors, and above them, in narrow rooms thick with smoke and ambition, London's words are being born. Every paper, pamphlet, and scandal starts here in a cafe that smells of burnt beans and lightning. The sign outside reads, "The Albion Coffee Rooms," though the regulars simply call it the Pulse. Inside, the air is a living thing dense with tobacco, newsprint, and steam. Cups rattle on saucers, pens scratch against paper, boots thud on the wooden floor in restless rhythm. The waiters glide through it all like ghosts, their white aprons streaked with ink. No one speaks softly here. Arguments rise like weather fronts, fierce and sudden, dissolving just as quickly into laughter. Fleet Street is a city within a city, its caffeine-fueled parliament always in session. At the window table sits Mr. Avery, editor of the London Mercury, his waistcoat undone, his hair silvered with fatigue. He hasn't slept in 2 days' deadlines, dispatches, demands. A half-drunk cup of coffee sweats beside his pile of proofs. The ink has dried to a dull sheen, like blood left too long on stone. His reporter, young Caldwell, bursts in with a notebook in one hand and a tremor in the other. "They've printed a retraction on the cholera piece," he says. Avery doesn't look up. "Then print the outrage," he murmurs. Truth doesn't sell. Reaction does. At the counter, the barmaid Lizzie pours another pot. The kettle screams over the din, and she wipes her brow with the back of her hand. She's been standing since dawn, serving men who look through her as though she's part of the furniture. She doesn't mind. Not much, anyway. Each pour is a coin, each refill another minute closer to rent. Still, she listens to every whisper of rumor, every secret passed over a saucer. Fleet Street's women carry more stories than the headlines ever will. Through the haze, a man begins to sing softly, a typesetter, drunk on exhaustion and too much coffee. The others join in, their voices low but steady, a kind of hymn to sleeplessness. The melody tangles with the clatter of cups and presses, until the whole room seems to sway. Even the gas lights flicker in time. Outside, the street is chaos. Carriage wheels, newsboys, shouts, and bells. The scent of roasting coffee spills into the wind, mixing with printer's ink and horse dung, the perfume of progress. Inside, deadlines dissolve into night. The men argue until their voices rasp, until the room tilts with fatigue. When the last proof is sent to press, Avery finally stands, his knees shaking. "Tomorrow," he says to no one in particular. "We do it all again." Lizzie nods, refills the pot, and begins to clean. The room quiets, the gaslights hum, and in the silence between heartbeats, the city begins to dream in ink once more. Fleet Street doesn't sleep, it only pauses to drink. And in that small mercy between the press and the cup, history is written. In the quiet drawing rooms of Mayfair, where velvet curtains muffle the sound of the city, another London stirs slower, softer, but no less addicted. Here, tea is not survival, it is ceremony. The clink of porcelain, the murmur of conversation, the perfume of bergamot and lavender, all choreographed beneath chandeliers that shimmer like still water. To the gentleman of the teapot, caffeine is civility refined into ritual, the empire poured into bone china. At 4:30, the world outside moves at full speed, trains screaming through tunnels, factories roaring, clerks tallying in candlelight. But inside the parlors of Grosvenor Square, time itself seems to hesitate. A footman in dark livery announces the arrival of the tea tray, silver, gleaming, heavy with service. Beside it sit sandwiches cut to precision, cakes iced like lace, and a pot draped in embroidered cloth. The host, Lord Pennington, leans back in his chair and lifts his cup as if it were communion. "Ceylon today," he says, inhaling the steam. "The finest batch this season." Around him, his guests nod in approval, each sip a performance of grace. The women, wives, widows, debutantes, speak in careful tones, their words chosen like the flowers in the room. They discuss charity bazaars, colonial prospects, the Queen's latest appearance at Windsor. Beneath the chatter, a hum of caffeine sharpens the air. Faces glow faintly, eyes quicken, hands flutter. It is energy disguised as elegance, the same stimulant that drives factory girls and soldiers now gilded with sugar and ceremony. In the corner, Miss Lydia Ashworth sits quietly, her gloved fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. She has read the papers, though she pretends otherwise, the ones about the plantations, about the workers in Ceylon who pick the leaves under a merciless sun. She imagines their hands, the same ones that pluck the leaves she drinks, trembling with fatigue instead of refinement. For a moment, the tea tastes bitter. Then someone laughs, the moment passes, and she smiles again, practiced and polite. A servant refills the pot. The scent of fresh leaves fills the air, citrus, smoke, a touch of sweetness. A tonic for the soul, says Lord Pennington. His guests agree. In truth, they are not wrong. The tea does more than comfort. It keeps them sharp, steady, efficient, just as it does for the clerks in the city or the seamstresses in the East End. Only the cup differs, not the need. Outside, the fog presses against the windows like an uninvited guest. Somewhere far below, a boy shouts the evening edition of the paper, his voice lost in the rain. Inside, the gentlemen of the teapot remain undisturbed. They raise their cups in unison, steam curling between them like smoke from a distant battlefield. As dusk falls, and servants clear the china, the conversation turns to trade, to tariffs, to the price of tea itself. The Empire, it seems, has found a way to drink its own reflection, refined, expensive, and endlessly addictive. And as the lamps are lit and the guests depart, London exhales once more, a city divided by class, but united by the same trembling leaf, steeped in the same restless hunger to remain awake. The docks smell of salt, sweat, and the sweet rot of foreign cargo. The Thames lies heavy beneath the dawn, its surface a dull mirror for the cranes and masts that crowd its banks. Men in wool coats move like ants across the wharf, unloading crates stamped with faraway names: Ceylon, Assam, Java, Demerara. The air hums with labor and language, Cockney shouts tangled with Tamil, Yoruba, Malay. The Empire has arrived, not with flags or soldiers this time, but in sacks and barrels. The riches of half the world reduced to leaf and bean, spice and sugar, all bound for London's endless thirst. On the deck of one ship, the overseer wipes his brow with a rag. His cargo is tea, hundreds of chests packed tight, the scent escaping even through the wood. The finest leaf, he tells the customs man, though he doesn't know its story. He doesn't see the women bent double in Ceylon's hillsides, plucking the tender shoots until their fingers ache. He doesn't hear the songs they sing to keep from silence. The Empire, he thinks, is a chain of commerce, smooth, efficient, inevitable. He does not see that it is built of hands. By noon, the cargo has been weighed, stamped, and carted to warehouses near the river. Inside, the air is a haze of dust and fragrance. Laborers climb high among the stacks, balancing on beams slick with sweat, their bodies outlined by golden shafts of light. The foreman calls out prices from a ledger, his voice echoing like a sermon. 4 shillings the pound? 5, for the best. Each note a hymn to profit. In the corner, a merchant tests a handful of leaf between his fingers, inhales deeply, and nods. A fine yield. The Queen herself could drink this, and she will. In palaces and parlors across the city, these leaves will soon steep in silver teapots. The journey from field to cup, complete, invisible, unspoken, divine. The Empire drinks itself daily, unaware of the miles each sip contains. The workers at the docks will never taste it. The pickers at the plantations never will. The flavor belongs to the city, to the Empire's mouth, which never stops talking, eating, or swallowing. In Whitechapel, a widow unwraps her penny packet of tea, sold from the very same shipment that passed through the Queen's brokers that morning. She doesn't know its origin either, only that it steadies her trembling hands. She pours the boiling water and watches the liquid turn dark, the scent filling her kitchen like a memory of summer she never had. By nightfall, the last of the ships drift out again, their decks empty, their holds hollow. The tide pulls them back toward the open sea, toward the same colonies that will harvest and send once more. The circle is perfect. The empire flows both ways, blood and leaf, labor and luxury. And so London drinks on, raising its cup to prosperity while mist curls around the river's edge. The water looks almost black beneath the moonlight, but somewhere in that darkness lies reflection, the empire staring back at itself, warm, fragrant, and utterly awake. The ships are gone, but their ghosts remain. Each morning, the docks breathe out the scent of cargo, long-departed coffee dust, tea leaves, cocoa husks, as though the air itself remembers the trade. The city lives on what it does not see. For every kettle that whistles in a London kitchen, someone across an ocean has bent their spine to fill it. Every sip has a shadow. At dawn, in a warehouse near the Isle of Dogs, men haul crates from the latest shipment. Their boots slip on the damp boards. The floor smells of sweat and salt. They work fast, not because they are eager, but because the overseer's whistle keeps time like a metronome. Steady on, lads. No stopping. The sound of wooden boxes hitting the ground echoes through the fog, a dull percussion that keeps pace with the empire's heartbeat. The crates are branded with names that glitter in the imagination. Ceylon's Gold Leaf, Java's Pride, Malabar Roast. The men don't read them. They don't need to. They only count weight, not worth. When the foreman isn't looking, one worker breaks open a small bag, scooping a pinch of tea into his pocket. He doesn't steal for greed, he steals for warmth. That night, his wife will brew it in their single-room flat, and for a few minutes they'll pretend to be rich. Far away, in the hills of Assam, dawn comes the same way, the same pale light, the same sound of boiling water, but a different kind of labor. Women move through rows of tea bushes, baskets strapped to their backs. The air is heavy with mist and insects. Overseers on horseback pace behind them, their voices sharp as the whip that hangs from their belts. For every cup poured in London, these women pick thousands of leaves, their fingers stained brown, their wages smaller than a coin. They do not drink what they make, they drink water when they can find it clean. Back in London, the city hums without hesitation. Offices open, trains thunder, factories shudder awake. Stimulant keeps it moving, a chemical rhythm flowing from docks to desk, from plantation to parlor. But there are moments, small ones, when the illusion wavers. In the window of a coffee house near the Strand, a young woman stares into her cup, tracing circles in the surface of her drink. She works in a textile shop, stitching imported silks, her fingers raw and quick. She doesn't know where the silk comes from or who made it. She doesn't know where the coffee was grown either. She only knows it helps her forget she's tired. By evening, the city glows again, each lamp flickering like a heartbeat. Men toast progress, women pour tea, and children press their noses to bakery glass. All of them are part of the same invisible exchange work for wakefulness, sleep, for survival. London believes it has found a miracle, energy in liquid form, progress in a cup. But beneath that comfort lies the truth that the empire's wealth is measured not in gold, but in exhaustion. The more it drinks, the less it rests. The more it awakens, the more it forgets who pays the price. And so the city stays up brilliant, trembling, and never fully alive, never fully asleep. It began in a room that smelled of chalk dust and burnt sugar. A German chemist, thin as his glass beakers, leaned over a flame and watched the brown powder dissolve. The year was 1820, and he was chasing the secret of alertness, the invisible current that turned fatigue into thought. What he found that night was not gold or elixir, but a ghost of energy itself, bitter, white, and potent. He called it caffeine. The world would call it civilization. By the time word of the discovery reached London, The industrial age was already shaking the city awake. Every machine, every press, every pen demanded more hours than the body could give. And here, finally, was a substance that promised to cheat nature without breaking the law of God. Doctors hailed it as miracle science, a gift to the weary, a cure for melancholy, a remedy for torpor. Pharmacists stocked it in powders and tonics. Advertisements called it the spark of life distilled. At Street, Bartholomew's Hospital, a young physician named Dr. Reeves began mixing caffeine into his own experiments. He prescribed it to soldiers crippled by fatigue, to clerks who fainted at their desks, to women weakened by nerves. The results astonished him. "It sharpens the eye," he wrote in his journal, "and quickens the pulse of the mind." But soon he noticed something else: the tremors, the sleeplessness, the faint shimmer of mania that followed. The same chemical that made men efficient also made them restless. It gave them more time but stole the peace in which to spend it. London's chemists embraced it anyway. In narrow laboratories tucked behind shop fronts, they blended caffeine into patent medicines, calling them elixirs of focus. A popular brand, Dr. Walden's Vital Essence, claimed to banish fatigue in moments. It was sold in ornate bottles, the liquid black as night. Clerks swore by it, so did actresses, policemen, and priests. Even Parliament's late-night sessions were fueled by Walden's essence, poured quietly into cups between speeches. The more they drank, the less they slept. And yet, no one called it a problem. Sleeplessness had become a kind of virtue, the mark of a man too devoted to rest, too productive to dream. Coffee houses kept later hours, factories lit by gas burned through the night, and the chemists grew rich on the city's collective insomnia. One winter evening, Dr. Reeves stood at his window overlooking Smithfield, watching the fog roll through the streets. He hadn't slept in 2 days. His hands shook as he lifted his teacup, his own prescription steeped within. The body adapts, he told himself, though he no longer believed it. The city pulsed beyond the glass, alive, bright, and utterly exhausted. Somewhere in the distance, the whistle of a train joined the hiss of a kettle, blending into one continuous note. Reeves realized then that London had crossed a threshold. Sleep was no longer rest but waste. Fatigue was sin, and caffeine its absolution. From that moment, the empire's greatest addiction would not be pleasure, or power, or wealth. It would be wakefulness itself, a chemical dream disguised as progress. Midnight in Bloomsbury does not sleep. The rain drizzles softly against the window panes, catching the flicker of a gas lamp on Russell Square. Inside a small rented room, the air is a haze of ink, candle smoke, and caffeine. A poet, young, hungry, half-frozen, bends over his desk, the nib of his pen trembling in rhythm with his pulse. His name hardly matters. There are hundreds like him in London now, all burning the same oil, all nursing the same cup. The drink is thick, bitter, and black as ink. He pours it from a dented tin pot that lives permanently on the edge of his stove. The coffee has boiled 3 times already, reduced to a dark syrup that coats the tongue. He doesn't care. It wakes him, and that is enough. His hand shakes as he writes, the letters leaning forward like men in a storm. Outside, a carriage rattles past. A dog barks somewhere in the fog. He doesn't hear. He is somewhere between thought and fever. Caffeine has made him a creature of the night. He writes when others dream, hunts inspiration between heartbeats. When his mind begins to slow, he pours again. The smell fills the room, sweet, burnt, alive. He thinks of Keats dying young, of Coleridge lost to opium, of Byron and his brandy. They had their muses, their poisons. His is simpler, legal, and infinitely crueler. His muse does not kill him outright. It keeps him living just long enough to exhaust himself completely. He is not alone in this ritual. Across the city, candle-lit garrets glow like scattered stars. Painters, journalists, mathematicians, all chasing the same stimulant clarity. In Fleet Street's cafes, editors debate verse until dawn. In Camden, musicians strum half-written songs to the rhythm of their teacups. Even the philosophers, those grand architects of reason, sip black coffee until their hands tremble over their arguments. London's genius, it seems, is not born from inspiration but from sleeplessness. The poet pauses, staring at his reflection in the boding, dark window. The candlelight makes his eyes shine too bright. He looks older than his years, drawn, hollow, and radiant. He whispers the line he's just written aloud. The soul, awakened, fears the dawn. It sounds almost holy, and he smiles despite himself. Then he takes another sip, chasing the line that must come next. By 4 in the morning, the cup is empty, the ink dry, and the city outside utterly still. The poet sits motionless, watching the candle gutter. His heart flutters against his ribs, fast and uneven. The silence feels heavy, enormous. He knows he should rest, but rest has become impossible. Sleep feels like betrayal, a surrender of the very fire that drives him. When dawn finally bleeds into the sky, he slumps in his chair, exhausted and alive in the same breath. The manuscript lies before him, smudged and uneven, but real. He whispers a prayer of thanks not to God, but to the cup beside him, cooling in the grey light. London will read his words tomorrow and call them brilliance. But brilliance, he knows, is only exhaustion made eloquent, and caffeine, its ghostly hand, guiding the pen through the night. The clock strikes 4, and all of London inhales. The hour is sacred not to God, but to the teapot. The city slows, just slightly, as if remembering itself. Carriages roll more gently over the cobblestones, and in the parlors of Belgravia, Mayfair, and Kensington, a small orchestra of domestic sound begins. The rustle of skirts, the chime of silver spoons, the gentle sigh of boiling water. Afternoon tea, the Empire's most elegant addiction, has begun. Lady Eleanor Pembroke sits by her bay window overlooking Hyde Park, sunlight softening against the lace curtains. Her gown glimmers faintly with beads, though she is alone except for her maid, Agnes, who approaches with the tray. Steam curls upward from the pot like a ghost of faraway hills. The air fills with the fragrance of bergamot and lemon peel. Eleanor closes her eyes, breathes it in, and for a moment the day feels still. Outside, London roars omnibus wheels, shouting vendors, the dull throb of industry, but here, in this quiet room, it is another world. She raises her teacup with practiced grace. The porcelain so thin the light passes through it. Her hand barely trembles now. Caffeine has steadied it, the invisible tether between refinement and fatigue. She takes a sip. The taste is sharp, floral, familiar. It is the same taste that hums through factories and slums, though she will never admit it. Agnes stands by the window, pouring her own cup once her mistress looks away. The maid drinks quickly, greedily, savouring the rare warmth before it cools. She has ironed 50 garments today, scrubbed floors, fetched coal, and fetched water. This is her pause, her hour of small mercy. The same leaf that crowns the Pembroke table fuels her survival. In that moment, mistress and servant are united not by status, but by chemistry. Lady Eleanor sets down her cup and picks up the afternoon paper. The headlines speak of colonies and commerce. Profits in Ceylon rise again. New steam routes to Assam. She reads without thinking, the words sliding past like water. Somewhere across the world, hands pluck leaves beneath monsoon clouds, brown wrists glinting with sweat instead of jewels. She has never seen them, but they have shaped her every day. The conversation, when guests arrive, is light and laced with sugar. They speak of the Queen's health, of dresses, of theatre, of nothing at all. Laughter mingles with steam. Every topic is measured, every gesture rehearsed. Tea is civility in liquid form, a way to speak without saying, to fill silence without meaning. When the last guest leaves, Lady Eleanor sits alone again. The room smells faintly of lavender and heat. The teapot is empty, but the calm lingers thin, deceptive. like the moment before thunder. She touches her wrist, feels her own pulse flutter. Beneath the lace and silk, her heart races like a factory engine. Outside, the sun dips behind the smoke-stained rooftops. Agnes clears the tray, careful not to spill. A drop. In every house across London, the same ritual repeats: tea poured like prayer, caffeine flowing through the veins of empire. For the ladies of the parlor, it is elegance. For the empire, it is momentum disguised as grace. And when the last light fades and the silver cools to shadow, the city remains wide awake, polished, perfumed, and quietly trembling. Morning breaks with the scent of weather and industry, that unmistakable London perfume of coal smoke, wet stone, and something darker, richer, rising from the roasteries by the river. The first breath of the day tastes faintly of coffee and soot. It seeps through the cracks of tenement windows, curls along alleys slick with rain, and wraps the waking city in its bittersweet warmth. In Southwark, under the black arch of the railway viaduct, the roasters are already at work. Barrels of green coffee beans, hauled from the docks at dawn, sit stacked like treasure. The men shovel them into the iron drums, the metal echoing like thunder in the low-ceilinged rooms. Flames flare beneath the grates, licking the brass. Slowly, the scent begins to bloom, sharp at first, then round, almost sweet. Outside, the drizzle turns to mist, and the entire street smells alive. Tom Baines, the youngest of the crew, works the crank that turns the roaster. His face is flushed from the heat, his hair damp with sweat and fog. He listens to the crack of the beans, the first pop. They call it that perfect sound that tells him when the roast is ready. He doesn't need a clock. The beans speak to him. "Hear that?" the foreman shouts over the din. "That's money." Tom grins, though he knows his pay won't rise with the aroma. Still, he loves this part, the way the smoke curls like incense, the way the smell clings to his hands long after the shift ends. By mid-morning, the carts have begun to roll. Wooden wheels grind over cobblestones slick with rainwater as the sacks are loaded and carried off to coffee houses across the city. The scent follows them like a ghost, mingling with the downpour. Passers-by pause, sniff the air, and smile without knowing why. It is the smell of comfort, of conversation, of civilization. For a moment, the grey city seems golden. In Holborn, a housemaid hangs laundry under a leaking awning, her arms red from cold. The smell reaches her, drifting from the street below. It smells like warmth, like a room she'll never enter: velvet chairs, polished wood, men in waistcoats arguing over newspapers. She closes her eyes and imagines it, that world of comfort, all contained in a single cup. The fantasy fades when a drop from the roof lands square on her cheek, cold as fact. By afternoon, the rain turns harder, hammering rooftops and gutters. Inside the roastery, the fires burn lower, the day's last batch turning in lazy rhythm. Tom opens the doors and watches the rain hiss against the cobblestones. The air smells of wet ash and roasted beans, of exhaustion and triumph in equal measure. When night falls, London glows beneath its fog, street lamps haloed in gold, rain shimmering on the stones. The city exhales, and the scent of coffee lingers, rising like breath from a living thing. It is the aroma of labor and longing, of a people who have learned to trade sleep for purpose. Tomorrow, the rain will return, and so will the roast. The rhythm will repeat. The smell will guide them, rich, relentless, and unmistakably human. It begins with a rattle of coins, not gold, not silver, but pennies, worn thin by 1,000 hands. In the narrow lanes of Whitechapel and Clerkenwell, the poor have discovered a new kind of refuge. The penny tea shop. The sign above the door is plain, the window fogged by steam, but to those who step inside, it might as well be paradise. Warmth for a penny, dignity for another. Inside, the air hums with conversation and condensation. A kettle hisses behind the counter, clouds of vapor blooming into the cold air like ghosts escaping. Wooden tables shine with the dull patina, of spilled tea and sugar. A woman in an apron moves briskly between customers' factory hands, cabmen, widows, errand boys pouring from a battered tin pot that never stops boiling. Her name is Mrs. Larkins, and her hands are red from heat, her eyes soft from understanding. She knows each regular by sight, and though she charges every man the same penny, she never measures milk quite equally. The ones with hollow cheeks always get a little more. The tea itself is weak, reused leaves, sometimes flavored with soot from the chimney, but no one complains. For many, it is the only hot thing they'll taste all day. Bread and dripping line the counter. Sometimes, if business is good, there's a sliver of butter or a spoon of jam. Outside, the fog presses against the windows like another customer waiting to be let in. Inside, it smells of humanity. Steam, bread crusts, wet coats, and hope. At the back of the shop, an old man in a frayed waistcoat reads yesterday's paper aloud to whoever will listen. The news isn't good, it rarely is, but the sound of his voice makes the world feel less distant. Near the door, a group of factory girls share laughter between sips, their cheeks flushed from the heat. For a few stolen minutes, they belong to no one but themselves. A policeman stops by, nods to Mrs. Larkins, and warms his hands by the stove. The church may preach charity, the politicians may promise reform, but here, in the penny shop, charity is brewed hourly. It is not moral or sentimental, it is practical. Tea for a penny, humanity included. When the idea first spread through the poorer districts, some newspapers mocked it. Temperance for the desperate, one headline sneered, comparing the shops to cheap gin houses. But by 1860, the penny tea rooms outnumbered taverns in several neighborhoods. The same stimulant that once fueled polite conversation in parlors now fueled survival in the streets. As dusk falls, Mrs. Larkins closes her shutters and counts the day's coins, small, dull things that clink like raindrops in a tin cup. She is tired, but when she looks at the last dregs in her kettle, she smiles faintly. She pours herself a mug, sinks into a chair, and lets the warmth rise into her bones. Outside, the fog thickens, and the streets grow silent. But in the dark, a faint light still glows behind the glass the penny shop stove, keeping one corner of London alive through another cold night. In a city that feeds the world, the poor have found their own empire. A cup of tea, a place to sit, and 5 quiet minutes of belonging. It began, as revolutions often do, with a sermon not from a pulpit of marble but from a rented hall smelling of wax and damp wool. The temperance men spoke first, standing before rows of weary faces. They spoke of sin, of salvation, and of gin, of mothers struck down by drunken husbands, of wages lost in alehouses, of children starving while fathers sang beneath the bar. But their greatest weapon was not moral outrage, it was the teapot. Tea, my brothers and sisters, one preacher declared, raising his cup high beneath the flickering gaslights, is the Christian man's answer to the devil's draught. The crowd applauded, some awkwardly, some with conviction. In that moment, London's thirst began to change its shape. By the 1850s, the city had more public houses than schools, and gin flowed like water, cheap, fierce, and easy to find. But the temperance movement offered another vision. Light instead of darkness, tea instead of intoxication. Across the 5 city chapels opened, tea missions, where the poor could gather, drink, and listen, without fear of the constable or the landlord. The rooms smelled of virtue, sugar, and steam instead of spirits and vomit. In one such hall on Mile End Road, a young woman named Clara Booth pours tea for a line of dock workers just off their shift. Their hands are black with soot, their eyes hollow. The first man laughs as he takes his cup. Tea, eh? Won't keep me warm long. But he drinks it anyway, and when the heat hits his chest, the laughter fades. Clara smiles and pours another. She's heard every joke, every sneer. Still, she believes, the tea isn't just liquid, it's a second chance. Outside, the rain drums on the roof, and across the street, a gin palace blazes with golden light. The windows glow with stained glass and promises comfort, courage, cheer. Inside, the smell of juniper and despair fills the air. Men lean across the counter like wilted flowers, their coins vanishing as quickly as their strength. From the doorway, Clara watches them between her duties, her heart tugged between pity and resolve. She knows the tea can't save everyone, but she also knows it's saving some. The Temperance Society grows by the month. They print pamphlets with slogans like, "A sober empire is a stronger empire," and distribute them in the markets and rail stations. They host tea festivals, where families can gather, music plays, and no one stumbles home in shame. The newspapers mock them as joyless moralists, but their movement spreads like the very steam that rises from their kettles, invisible, persistent, unstoppable. By night's end, the tea mission is nearly empty. Clara extinguishes the lamps and cleans the tables. Her kettle, dented and blackened, still hums softly on the stove. She takes the last cup for herself, the tea now weak and pale, but its warmth still true. As she drinks, she hears a hymn echoing faintly from the chapel next door. The words drift through the damp. "Take not from us the cup of peace." She closes her eyes. Outside, gin palaces blaze like false dawns. Inside, the small light of her teapot burns steadier, a quiet rebellion against the empire of intoxication. And through that humble ritual, London begins to trade one fever for another, drunkenness for wakefulness, despair for endurance, the bottle for the cup. The hospital never truly sleeps, even when the gas lights dim to save oil, even when the corridors fall silent except for the echo of footsteps and the distant hiss of boiling water. Something in the place still stirs a restless hum, the pulse of vigilance. At Street Thomas's, that hum has a name: Caffeine. Dr. Henry Calder keeps a kettle on his desk, blackened at the bottom from years of use. He has not been home in 3 nights. The wards are full again: typhus, fever, factory accidents, the endless parade of Victorian illness. His office smells of ether, ink, and the faint bitterness of overbrewed tea. He drinks it by the pot, cold or hot. It makes no difference anymore. Each cup pushes him another hour forward. Each sip turns fatigue into function. The city outside may drown in soot and commerce, but here, under the whitewash and gaslight, the empire fights its quiet war against decay. A nurse knocks softly on the door. "Another case from the docks, sir." "Compound. Fracture." Calder nods. He presses his palm to his forehead, feeling the pulse in his temples. His heart feels too fast, too loud, but so does everything else in London. He stands, swallows the last of his tea, and follows her down the corridor. The air is thick with carbolic acid and blood. Men groan softly in their beds. The sound is almost rhythmic, like waves hitting stone. At the far table, an orderly unwraps a bandage stiff with dried crimson. The doctor rolls up his sleeves, eyes bright with exhaustion. He does not feel tired anymore, only sharp, dangerously awake. The stimulant hums through him, a companion he neither trusts nor rejects. He used to tell his students that medicine demands discipline, that one must not lean on chemical crutches. Now he laughs at that memory. The city has made hypocrites of them all. At 2 in the morning, the last operation ends. Calder scrubs his hands in silence, staring at the pink water spiraling down the drain. His reflection in silence, the basin looks older than his years. His pupils wide, the whites of his eyes webbed with red. He returns to his desk and lights another lamp. On the wall, rows of glass bottles glimmer faintly: quinine, chloroform, morphine, each a miracle, each a menace. But it is the small tin of tea that he reaches for first. Outside, London sleeps uneasily beneath its haze. Inside, Calder writes his notes by hand. The body responds well to stimulation in moderate doses. But there is a toll. The mind begins to chase itself. He pauses, listening to the faint hiss of his kettle, the quiet breathing of the hospital. When dawn creeps through the shutters, pale and thin, the doctor is still at his desk. His teacup sits empty beside him. He will fill it again soon, perhaps one more, perhaps the last before his hands begin to tremble. For now, the city awakens, and so must he. Somewhere down the hall, a patient moans. The day begins again. And in that endless cycle of exhaustion and mercy, caffeine becomes more than medicine. It becomes devotion. The cure that keeps the healers alive just long enough to break them. Dawn at Paddington Station smells of steam, oil, and burnt bread. The air is alive with motion, the whistle of the first train slicing through the fog, the clang of iron against iron, the steady murmur of a city preparing to move. And at the heart of it all, behind a long oak counter beneath a brass clock, the buffet opens for business. No one calls it a cafe. It is a refueling station for the human machine, a place where the empire's pulse meets its rails. Travelers press through the doors, still buttoning their coats, their eyes bleary from the night, their voices rough with sleep. Porters shout, boots scrape, cups clink. The sound merges with the hissing of the engines outside, as if the very locomotives were breathing along with them. Behind the counter, Mrs. Adelaide Cooper runs the buffet like a general at war with time. Her apron is starched, her hair pinned tight, her face lined from years of heat and haste. 3 kettles boil at once, each one whistling like an fair's impatient customer. The scent of tea, strong, black, merciless, drifts through the room. Next to it, a pot of coffee bubbles dark and low, the surface trembling like a storm. Next, she calls, slamming a cup onto the counter. 1 sugar or 2? A clerk from Manchester takes his tea scalding hot, gulps it as if drowning. A soldier headed south cradles his mug like a relic. A young couple bound for Bristol share one between them, fingers brushing as they sip. The buffet is an altar, and Mrs. Cooper, the high priestess of caffeine, she moves without pause, her hands steady, her mind counting seconds like heartbeats. The travelers don't linger. The trains wait for no one. The platform clock ticks toward departure, and each sip becomes a race against time. Cups empty, coins clatter, doors slam, whistles scream. The buffet empties, then fills again. The rhythm is endless, like breath. Outside, the engines shudder and bellow, steam coiling through the air in great white clouds. The tea boys weave between the carriages, carrying tin pots that rattle as they pour. "Penny a cup," they shout. "Hot tea for the journey." Passengers lean from the windows, coins flashing in the grey light. The tea splashes into tin mugs, staining gloves, warming frozen hands. Mrs. Cooper watches through the window as the train begins to move. She wipes her brow with her sleeve, exhales, and starts again. More travellers arrive, merchants, nurses, postmen, mothers with children in tow. She fills their cups, listens to their fragments of stories, their destinations blending into a geography of steam and fatigue. By nightfall, the station is no quieter. Lamps burn through the fog, and the buffet glows like a hearth in the storm. Mrs. Cooper finally sits, her hands raw from heat, her apron damp. She drinks the last cup herself, the day's final offering, and tastes the bitterness that the others never notice. Outside, the city hums, and the rails hum with it. London does not sleep, it only moves faster, and as the last train disappears into the dark, a faint trail of steam curls upward, carrying with it the scent of tea, the empire's heartbeat. Steeped and poured, mile after mile, the field is quiet before dawn too quiet. Frost lies on the canvas, tense like breath held too long, and the smell of wet earth mingles with smoke from last night's dying fires. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a bugle will sound soon, and the day will begin again, not with prayer or breakfast, but with the hiss of boiling water. Private James Barlow crouches beside a small tin stove, coaxing the flame with trembling hands. His fingers are cracked, the nails rimmed with dirt. The kettle takes its time, the steam rising thin and silver in the cold. He keeps his eyes fixed on it as if staring could make it boil faster. When the first rattle comes, he exhales in relief. From his satchel, he He takes a small pouch of loose tea, dry, crumbled, almost scentless now. It's all he has left of home. The others in his regiment begin to stir, boots scraping, coughs echoing through the still air. They move slowly, as men do when they've slept in mud and dreams of noise. "Barlow's got the tea," someone mutters, and within minutes they gather around him like moths around a lamp. The kettle whistles once, sharp and thin. He pours into dented cups, each man holding his breath until his turn comes. The first sip burns the tongue, the second wakes the blood. No one speaks. For these few minutes, there is warmth, silence, belonging. Tea is not luxury here, it's salvation. The officers call it ration. The men call it life. It arrives in crates stamped government issue, the same kind of black, dusty leaf that fills London's parlors and penny shops. But here, beneath the endless grey of a foreign sky, it tastes different. It tastes of memory. Each swallow is a reminder that somewhere, miles away, England still hums, factories whirring, kettles hissing, the same ritual mirrored across the empire. Later, on the march, they carry their flasks close to their hearts. When the cold gnaws too deep, or the nerves tremble before a fight, a sip from that flask steadies them. "Have a drop," one soldier says to another. "It'll put the steel back in you." They joke that the British Empire runs not on gunpowder, but on tea, that every victory is brewed before it's fought. There's truth in it. The army's supply lines carry more leaves than bullets some weeks. By nightfall, when the fires crackle again and the sky turns black with smoke and stars, Barlow refills his kettle from the nearest stream. The water tastes of iron and ash, but it doesn't matter. The tea covers everything. He drinks it quietly, listening to the low murmur of men around him, homesick, hungry, afraid, alive. Tomorrow, some of them will not wake. The frost will claim them, or the bullets, or the fever. But tonight, the tea moves through their bodies like mercy. Barlow finishes his cup, corks the flask, and sets it by his side. The last of the heat fades, but the comfort remains. In wars fought for empire and trade, it isn't courage that keeps the soldiers standing, it's the leaf that reminds them what they're fighting for. The empire may bleed in color, but it dreams in steam. The sound comes first, a faint, hollow whistle that breaks the silence of the room. Then the kettle begins to tremble, the lid clinking like a heartbeat beneath the hiss of steam. Missus. Margaret Bell sits beside the small iron stove, shawl wrapped around her shoulders, hands clasped around her knees. The fire burns low, more glow than flame. The morning light, weak and pale, crawls through the lace curtains, painting her narrow room in shades of blue and dust. She lives alone now in a tenement off Commercial Street, one of hundreds of widows left behind by the city's hunger for work, for war, for progress. Her husband was a dock labourer, strong once, steady until the fever took him the winter before last. His absence has a shape. It sits in the chair by the stove, in the empty side of the bed, in the silence between the tick of the clock. But the tea kettle still sings, and that is enough. It is her companion, her metronome, her memory. She fills it each morning with water, from the pump at the end of the street, balancing the bucket against her hip as she climbs the stairs. Sometimes she stops halfway, breathless, but she always finishes the climb. There are few rituals left that belong entirely to her, and this is one of them. She spoons the tea carefully into her cup, not too much. It must last the week, and pours the boiling water. Steam curls upward, carrying the faint scent of leaves and tin. She watches the color deepen, that familiar amber that has seen her through every sorrow. She adds a drop of milk, just enough to cloud the surface. Then she waits. She always waits for the tea to cool, for the postman who never brings letters anymore, for the day to feel like something other than another day. Through the thin wall, she hears her neighbor's baby crying, the clatter of boots on the stair, the creak of the city awakening. The world outside rushes on, fueled by the same drink, the same invisible current that moves through every class and corner. But here, In her little room, time slows to the rhythm of the kettle. On Sundays, she places a second cup on the table. She doesn't fill it, not really, but she keeps it there, for him. The chair stays empty, but the ritual feels right. She murmurs to it as she drinks the things she forgot to say while he was still alive. The kettle hisses softly, like it's listening. By afternoon, the tea has gone cold, but she doesn't mind. The act itself is the comfort, not the warmth. To boil water is to fight silence. To pour a cup is to declare that life, however small, still exists here. When night comes, she rinses the cup, wipes the kettle, and sets it back on the stove. The last of the embers flickers out. In the dark, she can still smell the faint trace of tea the ghost of another day survived. In every narrow street and attic of London, there are women like her, holding their lives together with porcelain and steam. The city runs on commerce and caffeine, but beneath it all, it is women like Mrs. Bell, patient, quiet, unyielding, who keep it breathing. Evening falls over the Strand in a wash of gold and rain. Gaslights bloom against the drizzle, and the sound of carriage wheels gives way to a gentler rhythm, footsteps, laughter, the faint hum of a violin warming up somewhere behind a fogged pane of glass. Inside the Café Concerto, London begins to dream aloud. The café is a narrow room of mirrors and mahogany, its ceiling low, its lamps glowing soft as candle flames. Smoke curls lazily toward the rafters, mingling with the perfume of coffee, sugar, and damp coats. Behind the counter, a pianist adjusts his stool, testing chords that ripple through the crowd like light through wine. It is the kind of place that pretends to be Paris, but smells unmistakably of London, coal dust and cream, ambition and ache. At the front table sits a young woman with a notebook. Her name is Clara Devine, a singer between engagements, a writer between dreams. She wears her fatigue like a jewel, her gloves stained with ink. The waiter brings her coffee so dark it swallows the lamplight, and she thanks him without looking up. The first sip scalds, the second steadies. The warmth blooms through her chest, turning hunger into resolve. She watches the pianist's fingers and begins to write. The crowd thickens as the night deepens. Dock clerks and poets, seamstresses and soldiers on leave all gather here, united by the glow of caffeine and music. Cups clatter, spoons ring, voices rise and fall in waves of laughter and confession. The pianist shifts into something livelier, and a violin joins in a melody, quick and clever, spinning like the wheels of the city itself. Someone begins to hum along. Someone else taps a spoon on their saucer. The air feels alive, charged, impossible to keep still. Clara closes her eyes and lets the rhythm move through her. She knows the tune, she sang it once in a theatre now closed to her. Life has been smaller since, but the music reminds her that joy can survive even in fragments. She writes faster, words tumbling out between sips of coffee, between the bow's flourishes and the clink of porcelain. Her hand shakes, but not from fear, from caffeine, from feeling, from being awake in every sense that matters. By midnight, the cafe is a storm of light and sound. The pianist's hair clings to his brow. The violinist grins through sweat, and the customers cheer between songs. The waiter moves like a dancer, carrying trays of fresh cups to tables that never empty. Outside, rain streaks the windows, turning the reflections inside into watercolor ghosts. When the music finally stills, applause breaks like thunder. Clara's pen rests on the table, the ink glistening wet under the lamp. She reads what she's written and smiles faintly, not because it's perfect, but because it exists, because something has been created here, out of noise and caffeine and courage. As the crowd disperses, the cafe breathes again, tired, smoky, beautiful. The pianist packs away his sheet music, the waiter douses the lamps, and the last swirl of steam rises from an abandoned cup, curling toward the ceiling like the final note of a song. Outside, London glows against the rain, a city wired by caffeine and melody, singing to itself through every sleepless hour. The lamp flickers, then steadies again, throwing its pale glow across the sprawl of paper. Ink stains bloom like bruises across the writer's fingers. His name is Samuel Horn, 38, unmarried, and known only by initials on the spines of cheap yellow novels. He writes for the railway stalls, for the masses who devour stories between stations, for pennies and deadlines and nothing else. He writes because stopping feels like drowning. The coffee on his desk has gone cold, but he drinks it anyway. The bitterness wakes him better than heat. His heart thuds in a rhythm that no longer belongs to him, too fast, too fierce, like a clock wound too tightly. Outside his window, the fog is so thick it looks solid, a grey wall pressing against the glass. He hasn't seen daylight in 3 days. Not really. London is still there. He knows its markets, its noise, its factories, but all of it has shrunk to this room, this lamp, this cup, this shaking hand. Each night he tells himself he will sleep once the chapter is done. But each chapter births another, and the ideas come faster than he can write them. He feels them in his fingertips, in the twitch of his eyelids, in the dry ache behind his eyes. His pen scratches at the paper like a trapped insect. The words blur. He laughs once, softly, to no one. Then he drinks again. The coffee has become his accomplice, black, bitter, forgiving. It sharpens him, carries him through the hours when the mind begins to falter. But there is a price. The tremor started last winter, small enough to ignore. Now it dances constantly through his fingers. The pen quivers, the words stutter. He presses harder to steady the lines, tearing the paper, cursing under his breath. Still, he writes. Always he writes. The publisher wants a new serial 5 chapters a week. The readers demand romance, tragedy, suspense. They never ask for truth. Samuel used to dream of writing something lasting, something that mattered. Now, he dreams only of keeping the roof above his head, of paying the bill for coal, for ink, for coffee. He lives on caffeine and sentences, his veins filled with both. At 4 in the morning, he stops to listen. The city outside has gone utterly still. Only the faint hiss of his kettle remains, singing its thin metallic song. He refills his cup, watching the steam rise, white against the grey. The tremor in his hand makes the surface ripple. He studies it, strangely fascinated, the visible proof of his devotion, his decay. When dawn finally breaks, the fog turns gold for a heartbeat. He looks at the stack of pages beside him, hundreds of words, none of them perfect, but alive. He presses his trembling hand flat against them and exhales. The kettle whistles again. He hesitates, then pours another cup. He cannot stop now. Sleep would mean silence, and silence is the only thing he fears more than exhaustion. So the pen moves once more, steady despite the tremor, a rhythm as fragile as sea. The pulse of the empire itself, unending, unsleeping, alive because it must be. The journey of the leaf begins far from the city it sustains. Long before the tea reaches the drawing rooms and factories of London, it lives and dies under a hotter sun. In the highlands of Ceylon and the valleys of Assam, the empire's hunger has taken root not in gold or spice, but in soil. There, among the endless green, the colonial cup is brewed before it ever reaches a kettle. Dawn comes fast in the tropics, and with it, the laborers. Women move in slow lines across the slopes, baskets slung over their backs, bare feet sliding through the wet clay. The mist burns away as the sun climbs, and the air grows thick enough to drink. Their fingers work quickly, plucking the tender leaves from each plant, 2 and a bud. Always 2 and a bud, a rhythm that repeats until the mind empties. The foreman rides along the edge of the field on horseback, his white shirt gleaming like authority itself. Each leaf they gather carries a fraction of their day, their strength, their silence. They are paid in coins, barely enough for rice and oil, sometimes in tea itself, bitter, unsweetened, a cruel irony. When they pause to rest, they drink from dented tins, not porcelain. There are no lace cloths here, no silver spoons. The steam smells the same, but the taste carries the weight of sun and labor. In a warehouse at the base of the hill, the tea is spread out to dry. Men turn it with wooden paddles, the air thick with dust and heat. Later, it will be packed into crates marked property of the East India Company or export for Her Majesty's markets. The words are bold and proud, but they never mention the hands that plucked the harvest. The tea will cross the ocean on steamships, tucked beside barrels of sugar and coffee. Its scent, leaking through the hold, the perfume of profit. Thousands of miles away, on the banks of the Thames, those crates will be unloaded by men who never think of Ceylon or Assam. The labels mean little to them. The tea moves from dock to warehouse to shop without question, until it reaches the hands of the people who will call it British. They will sip it in crystal-lit parlors and iron-dark factories, claiming it as their own. In the House of Commons, gentlemen debate taxation and trade, their cups steaming before them. The empire, one declares, is held together by commerce, but it is more fragile, more intimate than that. It is held together by tea, by the invisible thread that ties the sweating worker in the east to the waking clerk in the west. Back in the fields, the sun begins to fall. The women straighten their backs, their baskets empty now, their hands aching. Smoke rises from their huts, carrying the faint smell of boiling water, another kettle, another cup. The empire drinks on, not knowing that it is tasting itself. For in every drop of amber lies the truth of conquest, that comfort is never without cost, and that the calmest cups are brewed from the hottest labor. The warehouse wakes before dawn, though it never truly sleeps. Even when the lamps are doused and the doors locked, the smell remains: tea, tobacco, coffee, sweat, and hemp, a scent that clings to the very bricks. It sits on the south bank near the river, a great hulking mass of soot-blackened stone, where the empire's goods are weighed, logged, and sold. From the outside, it looks like a fortress. From within, it is a cathedral not to God, but to commerce. Mr. Horace Winfield, tea merchant and master of the establishment, arrives promptly at 6, his carriage wheels cut through the fog like a pen through paper. He is a man of ledgers and ledgers alone. His world is measured in weight and worth. The moment he steps through the iron doors, the warehouse stirs to life. Clerks descend from their stools, porters unfasten the bolts, and the first crates of the morning are wheeled into the light. A foreman breaks the seal on a new shipment, wooden chests stamped Ceylon, superior leaf, and the scent bursts into the air, sharp and dry, almost floral. Dust motes dance in the sunbeams cutting through the high windows. The clerks wrinkle their noses, sneezing softly. "A fine crop," Winfield mutters, rubbing the leaf between his fingers. He doesn't think of the hands that picked it. For him, the product begins here, at the dock, at the scale, at the sale. In the sorting room, women sit on low stools surrounded by baskets of dried tea, their aprons grey with dust. They work silently, sorting the leaves by color and curl. The younger ones glance toward the windows where a sliver of sky glows pale above the river, but the light is too far away to reach them. Each handful earns them a few pence, sometimes less. They do not complain. The rhythm of work has long since replaced the rhythm of thought. Upstairs, the clerks scratch their pens across parchment, the nibs whispering like insects. Numbers bloom in neat, black lines: quantities, prices, destinations. One ledger holds more than 5,000 names of buyers, from grocers in Bristol to noble households in Belgravia. The ink never dries before new shipments arrive. The empire's veins never stop pulsing. At midday, the porters pause to eat, crouched among the crates. Someone boils a kettle over a small coal fire, and for a moment, laughter fills the air. They drink the same leaf they carry, though theirs is the broken kind, the dust at the bottom of the barrel. Still, they savor it, their cups dented and warm in their calloused hands. For them, tea is not profit, but pause 5 minutes of humanity before the weight of cargo returns. By dusk, the last carts depart, wheels clattering down the cobbles toward the markets and tea shops of the West End. Winfield closes the ledger, locks the office, and exhales into the quiet. He smells of ink and commerce, of order and fatigue. The river below glimmers with reflected light as ships creak at anchor, ready for another tide of trade. In the dimness of the warehouse, a single lamp burns on forgotten, flickering above stacks of tea that stretch higher than faith. Outside, the fog thickens, soft as dust, swallowing sound. And still, within those walls, the scent of empire lingers dry, bitter, eternal, waiting for morning to begin again. The year is 1839, and the wind that sweeps through London carries more than the smell of coal and rain. It carries the scent of tea and of conflict. The city's cups are full, its warehouses overflowing, its merchants richer than ever. But in far-off China, where the leaf was first born, the wells of empire have turned sour. London's craving for tea has reached a fever, and the price of that craving is about to draw blood. In a counting house on Leadenhall Street, beneath a map of the world pierced with brass pins, Mr. Edmund Calthorpe reads the latest dispatches from Canton. His candle gutters as he leans over the papers, his face pale with worry. Blocked ports, the letter says. The Chinese have seized the opium. He rubs his temples. His livelihood and London's morning habit depends on that drug, not because he sells it here, but because it buys the tea there. Without it, trade stops. And without trade, the city sleeps. Outside, the fog thickens over the Thames. Dock workers unload crates stamped Imperial Blend and Formosa Oolong, never imagining the storm gathering an ocean away. In the public houses, news of tension in Canton spreads like gossip. They've barred the ships, one sailor says. Refused to trade. Imagine that, turning back the Queen's vessels. The men laugh, half in disbelief, half in pride. They do not yet know that the laughter will turn to gunfire. Meanwhile, the Parliament men talk of principle. Free trade, they call it, though freedom wears a peculiar face. They speak of honor, of insult, of sovereignty, but beneath the rhetoric lies a simpler truth. The empire cannot go a morning without its tea. The addiction is not just personal, it is national, structural, divine. The ships must sail, whatever the cost, and so they do. The East India Company's sleek clippers glide down the Thames, their hulls heavy with opium, their sails pale as ghosts in the dawn light. The same river that carries church bells and merchant dreams now carries war. The papers will later call it the opening of China, as though trade were a door kindly knocked upon, not a wall broken by cannon fire. Months later, in drawing rooms across London, the talk will turn again to tea, not to battle, not to bodies, but to flavour. The new crop has a finer aroma, Lady Worthington will remark, stirring sugar into her cup. No one will mention the men who died on ships that carried it, or the cities that burned to keep it flowing. The empire has learned to drink without tasting. Back in Calthorpe's counting house, the merchant seals another letter to the Board of Trade, requesting compensation for his losses. His hand trembles slightly as he signs his name. Through the open window, he hears the familiar whistle of a kettle somewhere in the alley below. The sound feels both comforting and cruel. The First Teapot War will end in victory if victory is the right word for it. China will open its ports, the merchants will refill their ledgers, and London will drink on. But something irreversible has begun. The leaf that once meant calm now smells faintly of gunpowder, and as the city pours its next cup, sweet and fragrant beneath a grey sky, it does not yet realize. Every sip carries the taste of empire's ash. On the polished counters of London's confectioners, chocolate gleams like a promise. Wrapped in gold foil, displayed beneath crystal domes, it looks pure luxury distilled into sweetness. The shop windows of Piccadilly and Regent Street glow warm through the fog, filled with bonbons and truffles, arranged like jewels. Lovers buy it as gifts. Children press their faces to the glass in longing, and the city congratulates itself for such refinement. Chocolate has become virtue in edible form, a comfort that feels almost moral, but sweetness is never innocent. Far across the sea, In the heavy air of West Africa, men and boys work in silence beneath the sun. They are not called slaves. Not anymore, the law has forbidden that word, but their chains are only thinner, not gone. They hack at cacao pods with blunt knives, the orange husk splitting open like wounds. Inside, the white pulp gleams slick around the beans. They scoop it out with calloused hands, pile it in baskets, and carry it through the heat to dry. The overseer watches from the shade, his shirt bright as bone. He keeps count, not of hours, but of sacks. Each one will cross the ocean to feed London's appetite for grace. When the ships unload at the docks, the beans arrive already anonymous. Commerce has washed their history away. In the factories along the Thames, they are roasted, ground, mixed with sugar from the Caribbean and milk from Devon, turned into velvet. The workers, women mostly, with quick fingers and tired eyes, shape them into bars and coins, wrapping each with care. They are paid in pennies. Their hands smell of sweetness, but their lives remain bitter. Back in the West End, advertisements bloom like spring. Chocolate for the virtuous household, the drink of comfort, the food of kindness. Philanthropists praise it as a temperate alternative to gin. Preachers call it a Christian indulgence. They do not mention the children across the ocean who never taste what they harvest, or the workers who faint beside the furnaces. Pure, the labels read a word that covers all sins. In the parlor of a Bloomsbury townhouse, Mrs. Ada Kellaway sips her cocoa before the fire. She is a charitable woman, known for her donations to the improvement of laboring classes. She believes that chocolate, when taken without excess, improves the blood and steadies the mind. She does not know that the same drink stains the hands of those who make it. She would be horrified if she knew, but the empire is built to ensure she never will. As evening settles, the city glows with shop fronts, each one bright as a lie. The scent of chocolate mingles with coal, smoke and fog, softening everything it touches. In workhouses and drawing rooms alike, cups are raised in comfort, in habit, in unknowing communion. Somewhere across the ocean, the fires die down, and a boy on a cacao field lies awake, his hands still sticky with pulp. He has never seen London, but every night he dreams of its lights. He doesn't know that his labor sweetens its evenings, and London, ever content, ever awake, dreams of nothing at all. The studio smells of turpentine, wet canvas, and coffee thick, bitter, and almost medicinal. The window is fogged with condensation, streaked by rain that fell all night. Inside, James Harrow, a painter of modest talent and fragile nerves, leans over his easel, brush in hand, eyes reddened from too little sleep. The candle guttering beside him flickers with the rhythm of the city beyond gas lamps, factory whistles, carriage wheels, the distant toll of church bells. London never truly rests, and neither can he. His coffee steams in a chipped mug, black and strong, sending tendrils of warmth into his chest. He sips and shivers simultaneously, the bitterness sharpening his senses. Each stroke of his brush trembles slightly with exhaustion, yet he works, moving the paint across the canvas in jerky, fevered motions. Outside, fog rolls like a tide, swallowing the Thames in mist. Inside, the color bleeds like memory, red ochre, cobalt, sepia, forming shapes that might be city, streets or ghosts. He cannot yet tell. Harrow does not paint for admiration or wealth. He paints because the night demands it, because the caffeine forces a pulse through his body that refuses to slow. Hours pass in a blur, each sip sustaining him, each shadow on the wall lengthening like a warning. The studio fills with the smell of roasted beans, wet wool, and paint a cocktail that keeps thought alive but sleep impossible. From a corner, a stack of sketches tilts precariously. They are studies of London's pulse, a factory chimney, a street child, the twist of a gaslight through fog. Each drawing is alive, trembling, imperfect. Harrow dips his brush again, the tremor in his hand following the tremor in the city. He smiles faintly. The imperfection is truth, the caffeine sharpening him to see it. The candle smoke drifts lazily toward the ceiling, coiling above his head like the fog outside. He thinks of other artists, long gone, who found inspiration in wine, opium, absinthe. They slept poorly, their minds racing between highs and hallucinations. His stimulant is simpler, legal, socially acceptable yet equally cruel. Coffee sharpens the vision, tea steadies the hand, cocoa comforts the tremor, all of it feeding creation at the cost of rest. By midnight, the room is heavy with color, the air thick with the scent of toil. Harrow's eyes ache. He stretches, leans back, and watches the fog pressing against the windows. Somewhere outside, a cab driver swears, a child cries, a train whistles. The city moves on, impervious, caffeinated, alive, and he is tethered to it, brush in hand, heart racing with every sip, every stroke. Dawn will come in grey light, touching the tops of roofs with pallid gold. Harrow will pour another cup, rinse his brushes, and begin again. The world demands more work, more colour, more life distilled into pigment and steam. London never stops, never rests, and neither can he. The artist paints on, a creature of caffeine and vision, his mind alive even as his body whispers for sleep. In the studio, the empire's pulse is mirrored, relentless, vibrating, beautiful, and cruel. The lamps flicker low, struggling against the fog that presses like a living thing against the glass. Soho streets are deserted, save for the occasional carriage wheel or a distant shout. Inside the Cafe of Ghosts, the world bends differently, softer, slower, and yet impossibly awake. The sign outside sways in the wind, open all hours. It is true, here time is irrelevant, and the only law is the hum of steam and the hiss of kettles. A solitary pianist warms his fingers on the keys, the notes trembling through the air, fading into the scent of coffee, cocoa, and wet cobblestones. Patrons sit alone at small tables, their eyes fixed on cups that are already half empty, their hands resting on saucers like lifelines. The cafe smells of ambition, exhaustion, and something else, a faint sweetness that lingers even when the coffee turns cold. Clara Devine is here again, notebook open, fingers stained with ink. She has walked through the fog, over the wet stones, to sit in this sanctuary that exists outside the city's relentless heartbeat. Her cup is dark and bitter, black as night itself, and she drinks with measured sips, letting it warm her from the inside out. Around her, the other guests are spectral clerks, artists, reporters, and writers, all chasing the same illusion. Focus, inspiration, survival. They speak little, they write and think, letting the music, the steam, and the ritual of caffeine carry them through the night. The waiters move like shadows between the tables, refilling mugs and pouring more from the copper urns that never cool. Every clink of porcelain is amplified in the quiet, echoing off the walls lined with mirrors, doubling the number of patrons who exist at once. Someone coughs, someone laughs softly, another sighs. It is all part of the rhythm, the pulse of a city that refuses to rest. From the back, the sound of a violin begins, faint at first, then swelling. It mingles with the piano, with the hiss of kettles, with the occasional scraping of chairs across the wooden floor. The patrons close their eyes. Some smile faintly. Some bite their lips to keep from speaking. The music rises and falls like the tide, carrying with it the invisible energy of the night, the same energy that courses through the veins of London, tireless, restless, and never fully human. Hours pass, though no one marks them. Outside, fog presses thicker against the glass. Inside, cups empty, are refilled, and emptied again. Steam curls toward the ceiling, carrying whispers of dreams and memories, 1,000 small confessions drowned in caffeine. Here, ambition is tangible, exhaustion is honored, inspiration is bought, borrowed, or stolen from the night. When the first light of morning begins to creep over the rooftops, the Cafe of Ghosts remains alive. Patrons file out into the mist, leaving behind the scent of coffee and the faint echo of music. The urns are drained, the tables polished, the mirrors fogged from the night's heat. And yet, the cafe waits, as it always does, for the next wave of the sleepless, the driven, the haunted. London itself, outside in the fog, seems quieter in comparison, but only for a moment. Soon, the factories will roar, the trains will whistle, the streets will thrum again, and somewhere in Soho, the cafe of ghosts will breathe once more, hissing, steaming, alive, a sanctuary for the empire's restless heart. The morning is grey and sharp, the streets slick with frost and rain. Along the narrow alleys of Bermondsey and Whitechapel, men shuffle toward the factories, their breath misting in the cold air. Boots clatter against stone, carts rattle with produce and coal. The city moves relentlessly, as it has for decades, powered by muscle, ambition, and something invisible that hums beneath the skin. It is the rhythm of labor, unyielding, unstoppable, fed by cups of tea and coffee taken in hurried sips between work and work. John Weaver, a factory hand in his 20s, pauses at a corner where a small wooden kettle has been set upon a coal brazier. It hisses softly, spilling steam into the morning chill. The vendor, a squat woman with arms as strong as the oaks along the Thames, pours thick, black tea into chipped tin cups. John lifts his own and drinks, grimacing at the heat and bitterness, but feeling it seep into his veins like oil. It steadies him, it sharpens him. It is the only thing that allows him to meet the day. The pause is brief, minutes at most. John wipes his mouth with the back of his sleeve and returns the cup. Others take their turn. A man with a coal-streaked face, a boy no older than 13, a seamstress with fingers red from stitching. Each drink is identical, yet each carries a different weight. For the boy, it is courage. For the seamstress, endurance. For the coalman, memory of a home warmed by something better than sweat. Across the street, the factory looms like a great iron cathedral. Its chimneys breathe black smoke into the fog, engines thrum, and belts grind like the heartbeat of the city itself. John steps inside, the warmth hitting him like a promise, though it is a cruel one. Hours of toil await, each minute measured by the pace of the machines. Without the tea, the work would break him. With it, he can follow the rhythm, steady his hands, and pretend that exhaustion is something negotiable. By midday, the city hums with countless pauses like this. Tea kettles hiss in every alley and workshop, black liquid moving through tin cups, stomachs, and veins. The empire depends on it. The same leaf that soothes a factory hand in Bermondsey flows into the parlors of Mayfair, into coffee houses in Fleet Street, into the homes of women who can afford leisure and men who can afford ambition. The pause is universal, though it is experienced differently. Survival for some, civility for others, inspiration for a few. When the whistle calls the end of the shift, John and his companions stagger into the street. Their faces are grey, their hands blistered, their backs aching. They carry their fatigue home, but they carry it steadied by the brief warmth of tea, a small reprieve that makes the long day bearable. Outside, fog curls along the cobblestones, and the city exhales. The factories will roar again tomorrow, the whistles will blow, the streets will fill, and somewhere, on another corner, a kettle will hiss again, offering the same merciful pause, fleeting, bitter, indispensable. London never rests. Its pulse is measured not only in engines and bells, but in steam, in cups, in the brief, sacred moments when labourer and leaf meet, if only for a heartbeat. The first light seeps slowly into Clerkenwell, brushing against slate roofs and chimneys that cough black smoke into the chill air. The city wakes around her, indifferent to the hours stolen by labour and the hours stolen by longing. But inside her small shop, windows fogged by the heat of boiling water, she rules time itself. Matilda Harper, 28, wiry, sharp-eyed, is awake before the rest of London, and she will remain awake long after most have stumbled to bed. Her day begins with a ritual as precise as any ritual in the parlour of a duchess. The kettle sings as she fills it, the water sputtering and boiling in a symphony she alone understands. She measures her tea with care, just enough to sharpen the mind, just enough to warm the body. A dash of sugar, a splash of milk, no more, no less. The cup trembles in her hand, sending ripples across the dark liquid. She inhales, feels the warmth rise into her chest, and the day begins. Outside, the streets are already thick with motion. Factory chimneys spew, carriage wheels clatter, newsboys shout the morning edition. Matilda listens from her shop, noting each sound with the acuity that comes from years of necessity. She does not sleep lightly, not any longer. The empire demands wakefulness, but she has learned to seize it, to bend it to her own rhythm. The tea is her weapon and her shield. Her customers arrive in waves. Seamstresses from the East End clutch pennies and small coins, waiting for the warmth of tea to steady their fingers. Dockhands pause briefly before heading to the quays, palms black with coal and sweat. Clerks lift tin mugs from the counter, eyes red from ledger lines and late-night calculations. They do not speak much. No one here has the leisure to chatter. The conversation is in the rhythm of pouring, drinking, and the sighs between sips. Matilda moves among them, filling cups, listening, keeping track. She knows the schedules, the habits, the tired and eager faces that will pass through her door day after day. She has been doing this long enough to read exhaustion like an open book. She nods silently, refills mugs with a careful hand, adjusts sugar or milk where it is needed. She is both servant and ruler here, governing the pulse of the morning through steam and leaf. By midday, the city hums beyond her windows, oblivious to the small empires within. Matilda's shop is a sanctuary, a citadel of warmth, a pause in the relentless march of hours. She drinks from her own cup between serving, letting the heat crawl up her arms, steady her mind, sharpen her senses. Outside, London moves as if on rails of caffeine, but here, the world bends to her will. When evening comes, she closes the shutters and wipes the counter. The last of the steam curls toward the ceiling, a ghost of the day's labor. Tomorrow, the cycle will begin again, kettles hissing, cups trembling, hands reaching, the empire feeding itself one leaf, one cup, one moment at a time. And she will be ready. For Matilda Harper owns the morning, if no one else does. She bends it, measures it, and carries it carefully, one cup at a time, while London roars outside, awake, indifferent, and relentless. Morning arrives slowly in the schoolrooms of East London, carried on the mist and soot of narrow streets. Inside, the air is thick with chalk dust, the faint smell of coal fires, and the bittersweet perfume of tea. The children shuffle in, their coats threadbare, cheeks pink from frost. Many have been awake before dawn, helping mothers at market stalls, running errands for shopkeepers, or carrying parcels across cobblestones slick with rain. Their tiny hands tremble not from cold alone, but from fatigue. At the back of the classroom, a kettle hisses on a small stove, a ritual as regular as the bell that summons lessons. Miss Thompson, the teacher, lifts it with care, pouring black, strong tea into chipped tin cups. The children wait patiently, standing in line with eyes lowered, hands cupped together. The tea is bitter, thin, yet it carries warmth and, more importantly, alertness. For these children, caffeine is not indulgence, it is preparation, fortification, a quiet promise that they can survive the day. The first sip makes a difference. Faces that were pale and drooping straighten, eyes brighten, voices sharpen. The youngest, a girl no more than 7, leans against the stove, the cup nearly too large for her hands. She drinks carefully, feeling the heat spread through her, feeling the pulse of the city awaken inside her chest. Across the room, boys fidget in their seats, counting their lessons not by minutes but by the rhythm of the tea's warmth. Miss Thompson circulates among them, adjusting collars, straightening sleeves, offering a word of encouragement. She knows that the tea is not enough, that hunger gnaws, that shoes are thin, that the day will be long. But it is a start. She tells herself that in these small moments, with steam rising from tin cups and the bitter scent of leaves lingering in the air, she is giving them more than education. She is giving them stamina, attention, survival. Outside, the city hums in rhythm with the classroom. Factory whistles pierce the fog. Coal carts rattle over stone. Women shout to one another across the alleys. Each cup of tea drunk inside the schoolroom is mirrored somewhere else by mothers in tenements, clerks in counting houses, dock workers on the riverbanks. London runs on this quiet miracle, invisible and unremarkable, yet indispensable. The children are both beneficiaries and carriers of it, small engines in the empire's vast, caffeinated machine. By mid-morning, lessons begin in earnest. Arithmetic, reading, penmanship all sharpened, steadied by the tea. Hands that might have trembled over quills now write in careful lines. Minds that might have wandered amid hunger and exhaustion now hold on to letters, numbers, ideas. The beverage is simple, but its effect is profound. 1,000 small awakenings, one classroom at a time. When the bell finally tolls, signaling the end of lessons, the children file out, still clutching their tin cups. Some will walk to factories, others to markets, some home to feed younger siblings. The tea lingers in their blood, carrying warmth and wakefulness across streets, over bridges, through fog. London consumes them as much as it feeds them, and the empire moves forward in small steps, one bitter cup at a time. The streets of London glow beneath the gaslights, though they are grey with fog and soot. Shop windows blaze with colour and promise, each pane of glass a stage for desire. On Regent Street, in Piccadilly, and down narrow alleys in Soho, posters and placards shout in bold type, "Awaken the mind, refresh the body, drink the elixir of energy." The words blur together in the haze, but the message is clear. Caffeine is no longer just a beverage, it is ambition, opportunity, virtue, a promise distilled into liquid form. At a small print shop, ink-stained men and women labor over presses that roll without pause. Each sheet carries a new advertisement. Tea for vigor, coffee for courage, chocolate for refinement. The paper smells faintly of ink and steam. They run the presses late into the night, the rhythmic thump echoing like the heartbeat of the city itself. Their own cups of coffee sit nearby, the liquid dark and bitter, sustaining them through the hours. The advertisements they create will travel across streets, alleys, and townships, reaching eyes that have never seen the plantations where the leaf was plucked, or the factories where the beans were roasted. In a department store along the Strand, the ads are already in play. A tray of fine china sits beneath a gilded frame. Teapots, cups, and saucers arranged as if to suggest a ritual more important than necessity. A young woman in a shawl pauses before it, rubbing her fingers together against the chill, imagining what it might feel like to drink from such porcelain. She has no money for this, but the scent of leaves and promise fills her imagination. She touches the glass softly, leaving a smudge that reflects her yearning. Meanwhile, in a wealthy townhouse in Bloomsbury, a gentleman reads the morning paper aloud to his wife. "New shipment from Assam," he says, emphasizing the word Assam as though it were a jewel. The advertisement shows a teapot pouring steam into a gilded cup, the liquid catching the light like a golden promise. They sip their morning tea, both assured of quality, of status, of refinement. They never think of the men and women who harvested it, or the ships that carried it across oceans in storm and heat. For them, caffeine is comfort. For the laborer, it is survival. In the alleys of East London, a boy hawks Walden's Essence at the docks, shouting over the hiss of steam engines and the cries of gulls. His words mimic the printed slogans, "Awaken your senses," "Strength for the day." The men and women passing pause, mugs in hand, and sometimes purchase a small vial, thinking it a marvel, a secret weapon against fatigue. They do not consider that their vitality comes at the expense of someone's endless toil in the fields or factories far away. By nightfall, London glows with advertisements lit, loud, insistent. Every poster, every handbill, every painted window celebrates the promise of energy, the illusion of power, the sweetness of desire. And the city drinks it in, unknowing, unquestioning, consuming not just tea or coffee, but the empire's very pulse, one cup, one ad, one longing at a time. The street lights hum in the fog, reflecting the city's hunger back to itself. Somewhere, a kettle hisses, a cup trembles in someone's hand, and the advertisements have done their work. London is awake, alive, and endlessly craving more. London never truly sleeps. Even when the factories quiet their furnaces for a few hours, even when the gas lamps flicker low in forgotten alleys, the city hums a faint, electric vibration carried through cobblestones, iron, and fog. Steam rises from chimneys and kettles alike, twisting through the air like invisible threads, weaving the metropolis into one continuous pulse. In every corner, some part of it remains awake. A clerk bent over a ledger, a factory girl at her loom, a writer crouched over ink-stained paper. All of them drink from the same invisible river, caffeine. By midnight, Fleet Street glows through fog and smoke, windows lit with the soft orange of gaslight. Inside the newspaper offices, editors and reporters hunch over their desks, pens scratching, typewriters clattering, eyes fixed on stories that must be told before dawn. Coffee cups sit in a line like soldiers, some empty, some steaming, all indispensable. A young apprentice folds his hands around a tin mug, inhaling its bitter scent, and wonders if the rush of energy in his veins is worth the tremor in his fingers. He drinks anyway. London demands it. The factories, though quieter than during the day, still breathe. Steam hisses through pipes, machines hum with residual energy, and guards walk the floors to ensure that nothing has gone awry. Women and men lean on workbenches, gulping tea from chipped mugs, feeling the warmth crawl through their bodies and steady their limbs. They know that tomorrow the engines will roar again, that the hours will stretch endlessly, and that without caffeine, the day would break them entirely. But for now, they savor the pause, brief and bitter, before the city claims them once more. In Soho, cafes remain open for the night dwellers, artists, musicians, and poets who cannot sleep even if the city would allow it. The piano hammers quietly in one corner, the violin sighs softly in another, and the scent of roasted beans and melting chocolate mingles with the fog that creeps through the open windows. Patrons clutch mugs close to their chests, letting the warmth anchor them as they write, compose, sketch. Time stretches and bends, marked by hissing kettles and the rhythm of spoons on porcelain. Here, the sleepless city feels almost gentle, a brief, fragile illusion. The streets outside are alive with the soft shuffle of those who must continue. Night watchmen, late-night laborers, mail carriers threading their way through the fog. Their cups of tea and coffee are their talismans, a thin shield against the bone-deep exhaustion pressing against them. London, at its heart, thrives not on its buildings or commerce alone, but on the countless lives kept moving by steam, by leaf, by bitter warmth. By the early hours, when the first hints of dawn grey the sky, the city has not rested. Kettles hiss, lamps glow, and footsteps echo through the mist. The factories prepare to roar again. The offices will awaken. The docks will bustle with cargo. Caffeine has done its work. The city remains upright, alive, and unyielding. London is sleepless, and it is magnificent, terrible, and utterly dependent on the bitter, steaming, relentless pulse of its cups. The empire moves, not by choice, but by habit. Habit, forged in the veins of the city itself, endless, awake, and impossible to still. The candle sputters in the small attic, sending shadows that twist and warp across the rough plaster walls. Samuel Harlow sits at his desk, ink-stained fingers cradling a chipped mug of coffee, the last warmth of the night. Outside, London sleeps fitfully under a blanket of fog and coal smoke, but inside this room, time is measured by the hiss of boiling water, the scratch of pen on paper, and the quickened beat of a heart unwilling to rest. He writes slowly at first, then faster, as the caffeine spreads its warmth through his chest, and his mind sharpens. Each word carries a tremor of his exhaustion, but also the clarity that comes from wakefulness enforced by necessity. He writes not to be read, not yet, but to unburden the thoughts that gnaw at him while the city slumbers. His confessions are not whispered to a soul or priest, they are inscribed on paper, a private communion between him and the night. "I am awake," he writes, almost as a prayer. Awake when the city dreams, awake when the streets are silent. I have drunk from the cups that keep the empire moving. I have poured them myself, watched them steam in dim kitchens, in workshops, in attics such as this one. I have known the pulse of caffeine as it threads through London's veins, and I have learned that it is both mercy and curse. His hand trembles, a mix of fatigue and the stimulant that fuels him. He pauses to sip the coffee, the bitter liquid leaving its trace on his tongue. It steadies him for a moment, but only a moment. The night stretches on, unyielding, unbroken. His eyelids burn, but he cannot close them. The city calls for attention, for witness, for record. He must remain awake, must capture what others cannot see in the half-light. He confesses the truth he has learned, that London thrives on the restlessness of its inhabitants, that the empire's pulse is measured not in law or coin, but in the trembling hands of clerks, artisans, factory girls, and writers who drink deeply to remain productive, to remain alive. The city demands it, and the leaf obeys. Coffee and tea have become instruments of survival, as well as ambition, shaping lives, bodies, and minds. Samuel pauses again, listening to the faint creak of floorboards below, the distant hoot of an owl, the muted echo of a carriage wheel. Each sound is magnified in the quiet attic, each echo a reminder that the city never truly sleeps. He continues to write, "I am not alone. I am part of it, a cell in its bloodstream, a witness to its endless awakening. To sleep is to surrender, to cease to matter. I drink, I write, I endure, and yet I fear the cost, the slow erosion of mind and body." By the time the first pale light of dawn creeps beneath the shutters, Samuel's ink-stained fingers have run dry. The mug is empty, the page filled with confessions that will remain secret for now. London awakens outside, indifferent, humming with the rhythm of coffee, the hiss of kettles, the pulse of an empire too, awake to rest. He closes his notebook, exhales, and pours another cup. The city will demand more, and he must be ready. Wakefulness is both duty and penance, and Samuel Harlow, insomniac, witness, writer, is its obedient servant. London moves as if possessed, its pulse carried in the hiss of kettles, the clatter of factory wheels, the scratch of pens, and the quiet trembling of hands across desks and benches. The city's veins are threaded with caffeine, and the empire itself seems to breathe through the cups its people carry. From the palaces of Mayfair to the alleys of Whitechapel, the stimulant flows unchecked, shaping lives, commerce, and thought alike. At a warehouse on the South Bank, crates of tea arrive from the docks, each stamped with distant lands, Ceylon, Java, Assam, a geography of empire distilled into leaves. Porters move them carefully, their hands calloused, gloves torn, backs stiff. They do not drink what they carry. That privilege is reserved for the city beyond, where the rich sip silver-spouted tea in drawing rooms, clerks gulp bitter coffee between ledger lines, and children in East End schoolrooms nurse their morning cup to steady, trembling fingers. The empire itself drinks, in thousands of small, unseen ways. In a counting house near Threadneedle Street, clerks lean over tables stacked with accounts. Ink-stained fingers grip quills, hands shaking slightly, eyes red from fatigue. A pot of coffee rests on the corner, copper and hissing. It is their salvation and their curse. the same substance that fuels ambition and erodes patience, that quickens the pulse while gnawing at the body. Every day, the empire demands more than gold or law. It demands alertness, endurance, wakefulness, and caffeine delivers, silently, invisibly, relentlessly. At the docks, sailors sip from tin mugs as they guide cargo onto waiting ships. Each swallow is a measure of survival, a brief respite from cold and fatigue. The tea they drink links them to a world they cannot see: a cafe in Soho, a parlor in Belgravia, a schoolroom in Whitechapel. All are connected by the same leaf, the same need, the same invisible promise that the day can be survived if the cup is full and the hand steady. In the palaces and drawing rooms, the consumption is different, but no less vital. Lords and ladies measure their mornings, afternoons, and evenings by the ritual of tea, the precise pour, the curl of steam, the faint sweetness. It is luxury, yes, but also habit, compulsion, addiction. It sharpens the mind, steadies the hand, and underpins the empire's social order. Without it, even civility falters. The streets themselves seem to pulse with the rhythm of consumption. Carriages rush past, porters shout, factories roar, children run, and all are tethered to the same invisible thread: caffeine. It is the substance that binds London together, that fuels the empire from the highest drawing room to the lowest alley, from the docks to the mills. It is silent, pervasive, addictive, a river flowing through every life, unstoppable and necessary. And when night falls and the lamps flicker against fogged glass, the empire continues to drink. Kettles hiss in attics and basements, in workshops and offices. Cups clatter on tables, spoons scrape, and the city hums like a living thing, awake and endless. London cannot stop. It will not stop. The empire's addiction is absolute, threaded into the very heartbeat of the city. One sip, one cup, one breath at a time, the empire remains awake. The laboratory smells of metal and steam, of powders finely ground and chemicals distilled. In a small room above a drab building in Whitechapel, the chemist Samuel Travers leans over his workbench, eyes narrowed behind spectacles that glint in the lamplight. The year is 1862, and London hums below factories, carriages, gas lamps, and the endless hiss of kettles. But above it all, in this quiet room of glass and flame, a different revolution is underway. The empire's future is being distilled into chemical form. Travers lifts a small vial of pure caffeine, crystalline and white, letting the light catch the facets like a jewel. It is a marvel, measured, potent, portable. No longer must the city wait for tea from the plantations or coffee from the docks. The stimulant can be carried, sold, administered, controlled, a grain for a clerk, a few for a soldier, measured with precision instead of guesswork. The empire itself could now be dosed, hour by hour, sip by sip. In the streets below, the familiar hum of the city continues unabated. Factory girls clutch tin mugs of tea, clerks pour bitter coffee into chipped cups, and even the soldiers marching toward the docks carry flasks filled with the bitter warmth that keeps their limbs steady. They do not yet know that the same effect can be bottled, packaged, refined into something stronger, something more exact. The city has long been dependent, but soon, dependency will have a formula. Travers measures carefully, weighing powders in small brass scales. A single grain could sharpen the mind, quicken the pulse, sustain the hand. Too much, and it brings tremor, insomnia, obsession. He writes the formulas in neat script, aware of the power contained in such small quantities. Each experiment is a negotiation between brilliance and danger, and the empire's citizens, whether they know it or not, are already the guinea pigs. Outside, London's fog presses against the windows, carrying the scent of coal, roasting beans, and the faint sweetness of chocolate. The city itself seems unaware of what is brewing above it. The factories roar, the offices hum, The schools and coffee houses pulse with the rhythm of human fatigue. Caffeine is no longer just a leaf steeped in water or a bean boiled to black. It is a chemical, a tool, a weapon, and the empire will wield it with precision, distributing alertness, endurance, and energy as if it were as tangible as coin. Travers pauses, lifting the vial to his lips. He does not drink, not yet. He is the chemist, the observer, the architect of the empire's sleepless future. Around him, tiny amounts of powdered caffeine lie ready in flasks and tins, waiting to be dispersed into society to clerks, factory hands, students, soldiers, and shopkeepers alike. He imagines them, moving through their routines, sustained by an invisible current, unaware of the precise measure of the substance that keeps them alive, awake, obedient, productive. By dawn, the first light will seep through the laboratory windows. London will continue to roar below, ignorant of the revolution bottled above it. Kettles will hiss, coffee will pour, tea will steam, and the empire will drink. Travers smiles faintly, noting the balance on his scales. The chemical future is here, and London's pulse, restless, relentless, dependent, will never be the same. The city is quiet only in appearances. Beyond the fog-drenched rooftops, the hum of London never ceases, a low, constant vibration carried in cobblestones, chimneys, and the very air itself. But in a small cafe tucked between narrow streets of Soho, the last patrons of the night linger, cups clutched like talismans. The lamps cast a soft amber glow, illuminating steam that curls lazily from mugs like smoke from a ritual fire. Clara Devine sits at a corner table, notebook open, pen poised. She is alone now, the others having drifted into the streets, carrying with them the heat of coffee and the promise of wakefulness. Her own cup is dark, black as the night beyond the window, the liquid still trembling from the heat. She lifts it carefully, letting the warmth seep into her palms, anchoring her as she writes. Words flow between sips, tentative at first, then urgent, tracing thoughts sharpened by insomnia and caffeine alike. Outside, fog presses against the glass in soft waves, muffling the clatter of carriages and the distant whistle of a train. Somewhere, a baker hammers the final loaf of the night, sending echoes through the silent alleyways. Somewhere else, a factory girl rubs her hands over a chipped cup, drinking her tea quickly before returning to her loom. The city is alive in ways that cannot be measured, pulsing with invisible rhythm, a tide of wakefulness that surges through streets, offices, and homes alike. Clara sips again. The coffee tastes bitter now, more medicine than indulgence, but she does not care. It steadies her hand, brightens her mind, and holds the tremor of exhaustion at bay. Outside, the first hint of dawn stains the fog pale grey, though it is hours away from fully touching rooftops. She knows she should rest. She knows that the world will demand more in minutes, that the streets will fill with voices, carts, and the hiss of boiling water from every corner. And yet, she cannot. One last cup, the final anchor before the city, rises. The cafe seems to breathe with her, inhaling steam and exhaled thoughts. She notices the subtle tremor in her own fingers, the pulse of fatigue that threatens to claim her, and she smiles faintly. It is familiar, this sensation of near collapse sharpened by caffeine, a ritual shared by clerks, soldiers, artists, factory hands, all those who have learned that to survive London, one must always be awake, always alert, always ready to drink once more. She finishes the cup, setting it down with care, steam still rising like a ghost from the surface. The pen continues to move across the page, words flowing almost automatically, guided by the rhythm of the city itself. The fog will lift soon, revealing streets slick with rain and coal dust. The first whistles will blow. The day will roar to life, powered not by gold, nor law, nor will alone, but by the invisible force that pulses through every vein of London, the stimulant that binds the empire together, one cup at a time. Clara looks out at the pale horizon, inhales deeply, and whispers softly to herself, "London never sleeps, it only drinks," and she drinks with it, one final cup before the sun rises, tethered to the city and its unyielding, caffeinated heart. The fog rolls thick over the Thames, curling around the masts of cargo ships and the stone arches of bridges like a slow, living tide. London exhales in clouds of steam and coal smoke, and somewhere beneath it all, the pulse of the city never falters. The streets are quiet only to the casual observer. The real sound is low, constant, vibrating through cobbles, factories, coffee houses, and workshops alike. The empire is awake, and it has forgotten how to sleep. In Whitechapel, a factory girl leans over a loom, her hands moving with precision honed by years of repetition and sustained by bitter tea. Her fingers ache, her back strains, but she does not pause. A kettle hisses beside her, a ritual as vital as the work itself. Across the river, clerks hunch over ledgers in counting houses, pens scratching through columns of numbers. Their cups of coffee sit steaming at the edge of their desks, their bodies sustained, their minds sharpened, each sip a thread in the web that holds the city together. In Mayfair, ladies lift silver-spouted teapots, pouring amber liquid into delicate cups. They do not see the men and women who carried the leaves across oceans, who plucked them from sun-scorched plantations, who roasted and ground them for hours so that the city might function. To sip is to be part of the ritual, but also to forget the toil that makes it possible. The empire runs on this forgetfulness, on the suspension of awareness, on the quiet submission to caffeine's subtle tyranny. Cafes in Soho remain open well past midnight, filled with writers, artists, and dreamers who have learned that inspiration thrives when the world sleeps. But London does not. Steam rises from cups like ephemeral ghosts, curling through rooms where music hums softly and conversation drifts between laughter and quiet obsession. The scent of roasted beans, chocolate, and sugar hangs heavy in the air. The patrons lean closer to their tables, tracing thoughts in notebooks, sketches, and half-formed compositions, all bound by the invisible tether of the stimulant coursing through their veins. Even the streets themselves carry the pulse. Cabmen curse under their breath, coal carts rattle over wet cobblestones, market vendors shout, children scurry with parcels. The city hums, unceasing, unaware of its own breath. It is a rhythm that dictates life and labor alike, where fatigue is tamed by leaf and bean, where the notion of rest is exchanged for productivity. In London, exhaustion is managed, not cured, and the citizenry has grown dependent on the subtle power that flows through every cup. By dawn, the fog begins to lift, revealing rooftops slick with rain, chimneys still breathing smoke, and streets glimmering under the pale morning light. The city, already awake, will roar to life again, whistles, bells, hammers, engines. The factories will swell with steam. The offices will flood with clerks. The cafes will fill with the first of the day's patrons, their eyes bright with the ritual that sustains them. London does not sleep. It never has, not truly. It only drinks, one cup after another, passing the leaf, the bean, the cocoa, from hand to hand, class to class, across decades and empires. It is brilliant, exhausting, alive, and relentless, a city tethered forever to its own stimulant pulse. And somewhere, in the misty glow of a street lamp, a lone figure lifts a cup to the lips, inhales the warmth, and whispers softly to the city, "Awake. The empire is awake, and it will not rest again."